Okay, well, I want to welcome y'all here today with the Veterans Business Outreach Center. This program is being funded by the Texas Veterans Commission. Our mission is to provide comprehensive training for individuals seeking to create, sustain, and expand their business. Some of the partners that we have are the SBA, the Texas Veterans Commission, the University of Texas Pan American, the Small Business Development Center, military transition offices, and other veteran organizations. This is what we're going to cover today. The training is going to cover customer service, human resources, payroll, and legal issues. So let me get started with the customer service. 1 in 3 small businesses will fail within the first 2 years. Half of the businesses will fail within the first 4 years, and 70% of all businesses will go broke before their 10th year anniversary. So, just a few statistics, think about it. What is the primary reason for business failures? Customer service. And we'll get more into that. This is a part that I think that everybody is kind of an expert at. Everybody knows when they go to a place whether they get good customer service or bad customer service. It's a personal issue. Another thing we like to talk about is the fact that last time we talked about the price of a product and how your customer is going to view its quality as well as its worth to them. And we talked about many non-price factors. Well, customer service is a big non-price factor. So this is just an activity, and it says, give an example of the best customer service you've received in the RGV. And I just want you to think about what's the best customer service you've received. I also want you to think a little bit about the worst customer service you received. So just think about that a little bit. I know, when I think of customer service, I think of like restaurants. And I think of like how a waiter can be attentive to what you want. You know, make sure your iced tea's filled, make sure your water's filled, make sure your food comes to you on time, things like that. I've also had bad customer service where I've gone to restaurants and I've actually left the restaurant because nobody ever came to take my order. You know, a lot of restaurants, the first thing they'll do is they'll take your drink order. And just to let you know that they know that you're there. And I think that's very important with customer service. So this is just a brief definition of customer service. Is providing the customer with more than a product or service. The product or service should meet a need that provides satisfaction to the customer. Basically, the customer should walk away pleased. Key stakeholders in customer service is the customer, your employee, and others, who's the service provider, and also the owner. Basically, you set the tone at the top. If you have great customer service, usually your employees are going to have great customer service. So, excellent customer service, why we care. Up to 10% of customers are going to buy your product depending on just the customer service alone. When you provide good customer service, 10 to 12 people on average are told about your customer service, the service they received. And 82% of customers will repurchase from a company that they're satisfied with. So, and in this, we'll discuss a little bit later about negative customer service. Basically, how do you build customer service? You build it by creating a culture. You define it, you teach it, you live it, you measure it, and you reward it. And we'll get a little bit more into that. Right here, we have an example of Zingerman's in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Basically, we'll talk about Zingerman's throughout the whole presentation. This is a place in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they have great customer service. I'll talk a little bit about what they do and how they've defined it, taught it, lived it, measured it, and rewarded it. The first thing is to define it. Zingerman's, I'm going to say Zimmerman the whole time, I know, but Zingerman's 3 steps to great service is first, you have to define it, figure out what the customer wants. Basically the customer service is a person who's going to be looking for the great service. They're going to be looking for accuracy, politeness, enthusiastic. They want to know that you're willing, the employee is willing to go the extra mile for their service, for them. So, to define it, Zingerman's 5 steps to deal with customer complaints. First of all, acknowledge the complaint. Let the customer know that you hear them. Second, offer a sincere apology. And we'll talk a little bit later about how the do's and don'ts of what to tell a customer. But the first thing to do is acknowledge it, then apologize for it, and then take actions to make things right. I like to use the restaurant example the most, is when you order something and it's not what you ordered, the first thing that happens is usually a good customer service, the waiter is going to acknowledge the complaint. Oh my God, this plate is not what you ordered. I'm so sorry. They're going to apologize for it. If not, they'll get their manager, and the first thing the manager comes over and he says, oh, I'm so sorry. What can I do to make this right? The third thing is to take action to make it right. So sometimes they comp your meals. They offer to get you another plate with the right order, things like that. The last thing they do is they thank the guest, and then they document the complaint. So that if it ever happens again, they know how to take care of it. They know that this is an ongoing problem, or is this just a one-time problem. So the next thing they do is they measure it. Zingerman uses what they call a ZXI score. And I'll show you a little bit of example. They actually take each part of their customer service and they put it on a scale. And everybody's seen these surveys. They always ask you to take them, to do them online. Basically, did we provide good service? Did we provide bad service on a scale from 1 to 10? And then, they'll take like 5 different areas and they'll measure it and they'll keep track of it and they'll decide what they need to improve on and what they don't need to improve on. Here, a good example is code green means they're doing good. They did a great job. Code red means there's a complaint. It's a good way to just name stuff and measure it so that other customers don't know what you're talking about. If they hear, oh, there's a red light thing and a customer's complaining, then the manager can hear red light or code red and then go, find out what's going on and take care of the situation. So this is just an example of what I was telling you about. This is how Zingerman describes their customer service and how they measure it. They divide it up into several different categories on the left and then on the right, and they take it. Now their scale can be quite a bit different from the 1 to 10. So it's really up to you to decide what your scale is going to be. Where do you rate in your customer service? Poor customer service, why care? Like I said, when you have good customer service, probably 10 to 16 people are going to hear about the good service and they're going to be, well, I need to go try that place. Here, if a customer experiences bad customer service and they complain about it, 20 people are going to hear. 20 people are going to remember, oh, I don't want to go there. They had bad service the last time I went there. Or somebody, I heard from somebody that they have bad service. So 91% of Poor service will stop a customer from returning to a particular business. This goes back into kind of what I was talking to you about last time about pricing. This is like a non-price factor. If you have good, you might be a little bit more expensive than your competitor, but if you have good customer service, maybe a customer is willing to go and pay a little bit more for it. If you have bad customer service, there's no way they're going to go to your business if you have a higher price. I was telling you earlier about these are 10 phrases that you never should use. You should never tell a customer no. I learned a long time ago, no is not a good word. It's not very positive, things like that. So instead of saying no, you should say, what can I do for you? Another phrase is, I don't know. Nothing gets a person more frustrated than saying, I don't know. The first thing they say is, well, who does know? So what you should say instead of, I don't know, is say, I will find out for you as soon as I possibly can. Another thing is, that's not my job or it's not my department. And you should say, well, let me find the right person to assist you. Okay. And you'll notice all these things on the left. We'll go down them. I don't know about you, but calm down doesn't work for a lot of customers either. That's probably one of the worst things you can tell somebody who's irate about the customer service is, you need to calm down, sir. You need to calm down, ma'am. So another bad thing is, I'm busy right now. Call me back later. It's not my fault. You need to talk to my supervisor. So those are things that you should never tell a customer. It's bad customer service. Some of the things that you can probably tell a customer is, I understand your frustration. I'm sorry. I'll be right with you in a moment, things like that. Now, if you look at the left side, a lot of it is negative, and a lot of it is you're asking the customer to take an action. So basically, not only is he frustrated, but you're also saying, well, you need to take further action to alleviate your frustration. That's bad customer service. All the phrases on the right, basically you're telling the customer, I will do it. I will get it done. I will call you back. I will find the person that can help you, things like that. So you're alleviating some of the frustration from the customer by saying, well, I need to do my job, work a little bit harder. So it's things like that. It provides good customer service. These are some of the tips, tools, and techniques that you can use. First of all, create positive impressions. And one of the ways to do this is utilize the Veterans Business Outreach Center or the Small Business Development Center. Utilize role-playing exercises. This is a technique. I like this because this is a way that you can train your employees on customer service and how they can do things better. Role-playing, they may say, I understand this. But it's one thing to understand it. It's something else to do role-playing and actually do it. So another thing is be on time, open up on time. Attend as many of the entrepreneurship training program sessions as possible. Be on time. I know today we started a little bit late because people weren't on time. And this creates a good map for people. That if I say I'm going to open at 8 o'clock, then I'm always going to open at 8 o'clock. I'm not going to open at 8:10. I've seen people just waiting outside doors, and that's bad customer service. Because not only can you lose customers, they'll get tired of waiting for you. They'll just leave. So always be on time. Go the extra mile. One of the ways is to read the entrepreneur magazines. We talked about it like Inc.com. Different management magazines, things like that. Analyze the customer's voice. I mean, are they irritated? Or do they like the customer service that they're getting? Things like that. And treat coworkers as customers. To be a successful entrepreneur, you need to be a mentor. And this kind of goes back, and the attitude toward customer service starts at the top, and it goes down to your employees. So you need to have a great customer service so that your employees can see a model of it. And it says here, techniques to implement best practices of companies with excellent customer service. If you see an excellent customer service, what are they doing that you're not doing? Maybe you can improve. Like I said, the best way to do is role play, take notes of when you've gone to different places, what they're doing, things like that. Bring it back to your business. What can you do better? What can you do to please your customer? Like I said, this is a major non-price factor. So these are just some telephone etiquette techniques. Try to pick up the phone by the third ring. I do this when I answer the phone. Try to implement this at your business. Try to be courteous to the customer. Say good morning, good afternoon, how are you doing? Give your name. Ask how you can help. Just to give you an example, the way I answer the phone is I said, hello, this is the Veterans Business Outreach Center. My name is Bill. How can I help you today? Or what can I do for you? Things like that. It's real simple. Like I said, this is stuff that you may need to teach your employees. This is stuff that you should be doing. Another technique, don't place a person on hold without asking them. And I've been put on hold quite a bit, and I'm sure you have too. So think about it though. How many times you've been, sir, ma'am, can I put you on hold for a minute? And that's a lot more polite than just saying, okay, hold on, click. And then you wait for a person. Don't transfer the call without it being okay. So many times people say, well, let me transfer you, and they'll transfer you, and then you get a voicemail. And then you're like back where you started at. You're back saying, well, I need to call these people back because I don't want to talk to the voicemail, I want to talk to a person. So good customer service, make sure there's somebody on the other end of the line. When taking a message, explain that person is not available. And that's why you have to take a message, and that they will return the person's phone call. So, and in the call, positively repeat action to be taken. Say, well, sir, they're not available right now. They will get back to you this afternoon when they are in the office. Can I take your number? And you take their number and you say, okay, we'll get back to you this afternoon. Thank you. So, some etiquette for email is respond quickly within 24 hours. 12 hours is preferred. It's excellent. And lots of times this is the way I deal with email. And if I'm not going to get to them within 24 hours, I usually will email a person and say, hey, well, I'm having a little problem. I'm busy. I won't get back to you until Friday, or I won't get back to you until Monday. And it's real important just to communicate. Let people know. They're not talking to you. They're just getting an email. They need to be sure that you have read their email. I've gotten emails before, and 30 minutes later I get a response back, another email that just states, sir, did you get my email? So it's real important that you just respond and say, hey, I've received it. I may not get to it today, but I'll get to it tomorrow. If I don't get to it tomorrow, then I'll get to it later this week. But I am aware of the situation, and I am taking care of it. It's real important. Read your email before you send it. I don't know how many times I've gotten emails and I'm going, do you even speak English? It's because they didn't read their email before. I read my email before, and I catch simple mistakes that I've made. I'm like, what am I trying to say here? That makes no sense. The person reading this is not going to know what I'm trying to say. So let me be a little bit more clear about what I'm talking about. Use proper structure, layout, formatting, things like that. If you see my emails, usually it has it's a brief hi, then it's an introduction. I frame my emails a certain way. I do an introduction, then I usually put, well, what kind of action do I expect from you? And then I'll finish off by saying, well, thank you, or sincerely, or something like that, so that they know my email is finished, that I'm done asking for things, or I'm done informing a person of something. So use spell checker and grammar checker is a big thing. I use spell checker all the time. I'm not a very good speller. And I know there's things on people's emails they send. Just the other day, I looked at it and I misspelled the word grammar. I was like, oh well. I was like, well, it's a good thing I reread my emails and I use spell checker, because that's not the way you spell grammar. So, add any disclaimers. You'll see this at the bottom of an email. It'll say something along the effects of, this email is sent by so and so. It's cannot be. It's not a claim for something, or it's been protected. Things like that. And include relevant contact information. Kind of at the end, you want people to know who sent it. So they can contact you back. This is things you want to add. This is all a business email. This is not a personal email. A personal email, I've seen people, they send emails the way they text. And sometimes you're like, what are they trying to say? But for a business email, you do want to have credentials at the end. Say, this is so-and-so business, and have your business, have your address, have your telephone number, and if you have a fax number, something like that, or an email address, so that they know who to contact. So, just in summary, what we've talked about a little bit about is maintaining customer loyalty through customer service. And basically, you need to work to exceed customers' expectations by allowing them to let you know what's going on, what they need. And like I said, this is a major non-price factor. Customers can be so much swayed by the fact that they're getting good customer service compared to disappointing customer service. And it will make a big difference on whether you stay in business or you don't stay in business. Another thing is, to ensure good customer service, one must understand their customers. Do a little research. We'll talk about marketing next week. Understand your customer, know who they are. You're probably going to have more than just one type of customer. Understand what they need, what their wants are, what their frustrations might be, so that you can look forward and take care of these situations. Know how to react. Lots of times we talk about different situations and we're like, well, if a person asks you this or is frustrated about this, how are you going to react? Depending on, sometimes you might say, well, I don't have the answer for you right now, but I will find out. And as soon as I do find out, I will call you, sir. And not everybody's expected to know everything at that moment. So be aware of that. Be aware of different situations that you may come across. So some of the references that are websites that you can visit, like I said, most of these are free. Customer Service Training Helper.com, CMR, which stands for Customer Relations Management, Learning.com, and Charthouse.com. Are there any questions?
My name is Christina Cantu. I'm a business advisor with the Small Business Development Center. It's basically what the Veterans Business Outreach Center does, but we're for the general public, whereas the Veterans Business Outreach Center is focused on veterans. So I pretty much do what the counselors do, what your counselors do, or what Bill and Carlos do. I do kind of have a background with HR and employee compliance or payroll compliance because I did work for the Texas Workforce Commission. I worked in the tax compliance section, so I did only deal with business owners and employers. So that's where this is coming from. And then since I've started working here, I've attended several seminars, conferences, webinars, everything having to do with HR. So we're going to have two presentations here. One of them is really the HR process, and I'm going to try, the point of this is to get you to understand why it's important to follow a process. A lot of small business owners just start hiring people, and then they see 3 months down the line, a month down the line, that they have problems. But some of these processes are in place to help protect you. So that's what I want to get out of this seminar. The next seminar is payroll compliance, which is going to tell you exactly what you need to do when you actually hire people. So what do you need to take out? What forms do you need to fill out? Things of that nature. We're going to cover a little bit of the laws, but I defer those questions about laws to those specific agencies, and we're going to talk about those agencies as well, because the other problem I see with clients all the time is we don't know who does what. So we don't know that the Department of Labor covers overtime and not the Texas workforce. So we want to make sure that you understand that, because you need to know who to ask, because you need to get the right answers. And it's not the Workforce Solutions Office, it's specific agencies. Okay, we're good? I'm going to try and stand still because I talk a lot with my hands, but feel free to ask me questions at any point. This presentation allows for questions to come about that I never even thought of. So it's okay, I brought a pen. I always update these presentations because of the same exact reason, that I get questions that are pertinent to everybody, and I want to make sure that I include as much information as possible. So just to get an idea, how many of you actually have employees right now or have employed somebody at some point? Have? Okay. So maybe I'm just going to confirm what you're doing is correct, or what you've done in the past is correct, or maybe you're going to learn something new. So we're going to get started. I kind of went over this. We already know what the Small Business Development Center does. Okay, so this is the process that I was speaking of, that when I deal with clients, they tell me, I just hired 3 people. And I ask them, well, did you have an application? What was the process? They can't tell me. So we want to make sure that you have a process. And it doesn't have to be anything this formal, but it should be something that you can create for yourself as sort of a checklist on how to get things done. So we're going to go over these in detail, but I wanted to make the point that just hiring because you're desperate, because you're going to start the business, that's not a wise move, because in the end, or 2 months down the line, it could come back and haunt you because either they're not doing their job or you failed to do something you should have done. So I want to make sure that you have some sort of process in place, maybe not this formal, but something. So the very first one is the planning phase. Basically, what are your needs? And we're going to go into detail, but I want to kind of break it down. I know planning for human resources. Well, what are your needs in terms of employees? How many do you need? How do you figure that out? Well, one thing when you're starting a business is, what can you afford? You can't afford to hire 5 employees, whether it's part-time or full-time, then you shouldn't be hiring 5 employees. So making sure you understand what you need. Recruiting and hiring, basically, how are you going to get people to apply for the position that you have open? Developing your human resources, training. What are you doing to train your employees? Compensating, how are you paying them? What are you offering them in terms of payment and as well benefits? And then separation. Everybody eventually leaves a job, whether you love them or not. At some point, they're going to either retire, quit, you're going to fire them. Everybody leaves a job. So that's what we're going to discuss there. Okay? Any questions so far? No? Okay, so the first step is planning for human resources. So develop a strategy for meeting organizational goals and objectives. So an example of this is, if you want to make $100,000 in sales in the first year, can you do that by yourself, 1, or do you need to hire 2 or 3 salespeople? That's what you're developing a strategy. That's what that means. If you know that you sell back to school supplies, and you have an office supply store, and it's already the end of July, are you prepared that come August you have enough personnel to cover all those hours, or to cover all the traffic that's going to be come in? That's your strategy. Figuring out what you need and when you need it. As well as, another example, I have clients that are at the island. They know that from March to September, they need to have full staff. But not in December, not in January, so that's a strategy. Planning for that point when you need those employees. You may not need them when you start your business, but you definitely need to figure out what period you need them and how many you need. Based on the strategy, the type and number, we already talked about that. An assessment is made as to whether these resources already exist within your organization. So sometimes I get asked, well, I have a full-time receptionist and sometimes she's not working. Well, ask her. Maybe she knows how to do bookkeeping and she can do your bookkeeping part-time, and then you don't have to hire another person. So maybe figuring out if who you already have can do the job of something else that you need. And we're going to talk more specifically about figuring out what types of work you need. Also, forecast the availability of your resources in the workforce. So it's not so easy sometimes to find personnel or staff. Sometimes people would rather go work for more, where they get more hours, where they get paid more. So it's not so easy for a small business owner to find workforce quickly, or to find good candidates for your specific business. So that's the first step, and that's, again, it's not something so formal that you have to put it together in writing or anything, but think about it. Think about the strategy. If you're already in business, look at your sales for the past year. Look how many people you had, and think about, was I able to meet the demand of your customers? If your customers are waiting for you to call them back because it's only you, well, then maybe you need somebody to handle customer service. So think about that. So it's not formal again, and I keep saying that because small business owners, we don't have time to be formal sometimes. You have too many hats on. So it's just a matter of having a checklist either in your mind or even on note paper. It's not necessarily something like you sit down and write a business plan or anything, but have something in writing. The other part of the planning for human resources is once you identify what you need to figure out how you're going to get those people or what kinds of responsibility those people will have. And there's 3 documents that are utilized to determine this. So again, these are very formal words: job analysis, job description, and job specification. It doesn't have to be that formal. It's just something that you're putting down for yourself, making notes for yourself when you start. Yes?
Can you give an example of the differences? Because analysis and specification to me is job description.
Right. We're going there. This is the next step. So the job analysis, determination through study, the important information about a job. This is more philosophical. It's not necessarily like you're writing down a job analysis, but it's figuring out what tasks are required. One example of how you can accomplish this, let's say you have a bookkeeper and she's leaving. She's decided no longer to work with you. Ask her, can you write down everything you do? That's an example of analyzing what that specific position requires. So a job analysis is more about, what does this person do? I have an example. My friend was a manager at a jewelry store. She was pretty much doing, because she left, when she decided to leave, they hired 3 people to replace her. That means she was doing the job of 3 different people. When they started to separate what her responsibilities were, one was shipping and receiving, one was the bookkeeping, and one was a sales manager. So they were able to hire 3 people. Had somebody sat down and said, what does this job require? They would have figured out at some point, maybe that's why she left, right? Because she was overwhelmed, because she was doing the job of 3 people. So thinking about what that specific position requires, and the way you can do it is either you've done those things yourself, so you can write a list of what that position requires, or having your employees do that. And it helps put together a job description, which is next. Any questions about an analysis? It's more philosophical, trying to think about what is included in this job position. The job description is a formal written document. This explains the specifics of the job. So what are the requirements of this job? It's not very specific to the point of, well, it could be, but it doesn't have to be. We'll be responsible for customer service. We'll be responsible for answering the phones or handling the bookkeeping, things like that. Includes job title, tasks, relationship to other jobs, skills, physical and mental, required duties, responsibilities, and working conditions. So this is something I help clients with. If any of you need assistance with putting together job descriptions, I can help you with that. But what this is literally putting down what you will require of that employee that you're hiring. Why is this important for you? Anybody? Oh, by the way, I test a lot. So I'm going to go back and test you all to see if you're paying attention. Can anybody tell me why a job description is important?
Now they can know what they're supposed to do.
Right, and why is that important?
Because let's say I got a job at the secretary, and then they tell me, well, you didn't take the trash out from the restroom. That's not my job. It's supposed to be here. And then they fire you, and then you sue them.
Well, absolutely. A job description is important because if I go into a job and I don't know what is required of me, how can you as the business owner discipline me? How? If you have nothing in writing, you have nothing to show me what I'm required to do. This also is important because if you're protecting yourself against an unemployment claim or the Department of Labor or anything like that, you have something in writing. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but I want to mention here that when you put together a job description, it should be solely based on job performance, which means you can ask them when you're hiring them, this is your job description, are you able to meet these requirements? Are you able to meet the responsibilities of this job description? And they can say yes or no. If they say yes, you already have something to say, well, later on, she didn't meet her requirements and she said that she could, right? So again, this is a way to protect yourself as a business owner. And I'm not saying like you're like it's you against them. I'm saying you need to have measures in place to protect yourself as a business owner, and this is one way. This is also good on their behalf. They want to know what they're responsible for. It's not like I don't want to go to a job and not know what I have to do on a day-to-day basis. I want something that tells me these are going to be your responsibilities. And if I have a question about it, I want to be able to ask, the manager, whoever, the owner, what has changed? Can we change this? It can be amended, but I want to have something in writing so that the employee knows coming in what's going to be required of them. Okay, so any questions on job descriptions?
I guess it's to make sure that you're covering all the functions required to do business.
Right, and then other things that's mentioned here like physical and mental. So you want to put there things like physical. If you require, I had an example of, I had a seminar and it was all daycares and they said, well, but what if they say they can do the job, but then they can't, because they have a bad hip, they can't be on the floor playing with the kids. Well, then that's something you need to put in your job description, right? Will have physical activity with children, must be able to lift children up to whatever, 50 pounds. I don't know how much kids weigh. But, you have to put those types of things in there if you require that they do that. So like UPS, maybe I don't know exactly, but maybe they must be able to lift 100 pounds over their head. And you can ask them to demonstrate that when you're interviewing them or as part of the interview process, because that is a job requirement. And that's not a requirement of an individual, that is performance requirement, and that goes in your job description. Any questions about that? Okay. Job specification really comes down to the specific qualifications. This is where we would put like education, experience, personal and physical characteristics. So again, these three could be one document. The process could be one time. But I want you to understand the differences. You need to have all of this information included, but it can be half a page. It can be 2 pages. It's up to you. But again, it's part of a process, an overall process. This is part of your test. This is one activity. So can you all tell me which one is which? So the first scenario, individual needs 3+ years of marketing experience, demonstrated experience in event execution, and excellent verbal and written communication skills. So what is that? A job description, analysis, or a job specification?
Specification.
Yay, who was the first one to say? I don't have any rewards. I'm sorry, I didn't come prepared. Victoria, do you have stickers? So number 2, the marketing manager is responsible for coordinating and implementing marketing projects designed to promote the business. So which one is that?
That's an analysis.
It is actually a description.
Where does it get into?
Remember, the title is part of the job description. responsible for coordinating and implemented. So this is where the job description will have your responsibilities, your duties, it'll say your job title, things like that. Remember, the analysis part, and I know that's confusing.
Take a marketing manager and give me an analysis then.
So the analysis is what will they be doing beforehand, before you put something in writing. So how do you know what they're responsible for?
Well, I would say, I've been in business 35 years, a description would say the marketing manager is responsible for let's see, if he's going to coordinate and implement marketing projects, for maintaining and establishing protocols for marketing projects, et cetera, to get more specific. To me, that's an analysis.
The analysis part is more of the thought process of what they will be doing. This is assume that you don't know yet because you don't have a marketing manager. It's the process of getting to the job description. So everything that's involved with figuring out what you need. So let's say you've never hired a marketing manager and you're in distribution, but now you want a sales rep or a marketing manager. What do you require of that position in order to be able to write the job description? So it's figuring out what you need before you actually put it down, which would be the job description.
So analysis would be more mental.
The thought process.
Than actually written.
Right. And the job description, think of it this way, is the formal document. The analysis is kind of making notes for yourself, trying to figure it out, which is everything that you said is valid and would probably go in the job description, but assume that you didn't know what would be required. And so you're just making notes for yourself, the process of mentally thinking, what is this position, what do they need to be able to do? Does that make sense? So before we move on, and it's at the very end, and I don't know if we have internet access. No? Okay. So I'll bring it up. The website is at the end, but there are different websites that have job descriptions available that you can go on there and use for yourself. I recommend that you modify it because not everything is cookie cutter. So if you need a sales rep, but maybe the one online says something that you're not going to want for them to do, you can use it. Just make sure to amend it for your needs. But we'll talk about that at the end of this presentation, but I want you to know that there's resources and then as well as we can help you. So let's go on to step number 2, recruiting and hiring. Once those documents are completed, they're utilized to identify either the appropriate internal candidates or external candidates. So an example of an internal candidate is we talked about earlier. What if you have a receptionist that knows bookkeeping or knows something else that she could probably do from the front desk if possible, so then you wouldn't have to hire another part-timer, for example. Or, a sales manager that also knows bookkeeping that could come in the afternoons to handle the bookkeeping. So thinking about that, it's always good to consider your internal candidates just because it brings up morale within your organization. So where they see, you know what, they're giving me an opportunity and they're going to give me, even if it's a $2 raise, they see it as a good thing, or employees see it as a good thing. So consider your internal employees. Make sure that, ask around. Maybe you don't know that they do things, or maybe you remember from the resume or the application that they can do other things, and consider maybe hiring them or promoting them within. And then, of course, with external employees or external candidates, there's different resources available for you to be able to find the employees that you're looking for. So down here is like LinkedIn, monsters.com, etc. But there's also the Texas Workforce has Work in Texas, where you as a business owner can go in and put a job opening and then use their service or their process to hire somebody or to interview candidates. The other one is you can always use staffing agencies. Staffing agencies are licensed through the state, and what happens there is that the employees are actually not yours. They belong to the staffing agency, and you're just basically leasing them from that agency. And then, of course, temporary agencies and things of that nature. The other source is the universities and private temporary agencies. So I just want you to be aware, sometimes people spend money on newspaper ads to advertise their employees or the job descriptions. but that doesn't hit everybody that you want to hit, or that, I know I don't read the newspaper. A lot of people see things online, so maybe spending that money could go towards something else, a different type of service to help you find employees. Any questions regarding that? So this is the process when you're actually recruiting new employees. The very first one is, of course, we've already talked about, that encompasses the analysis, the description, and the specification, is to identify the requirements. So select the source. So how are you going to get that candidate? Review applications and resumes. So that's one thing that we don't talk about further in the presentation, but do you actually have an application, or are you just advertising that you need, a waiter or waitress, and you didn't have an application in place? So do you have a formal application in place? The process of interviewing the candidates. Conduct pre-employment tests and check references. Now, notice that this comes after you interview the candidates. That's because a lot of business owners, for some reason, want to check references before you start interviewing, and that's not really recommended, because you don't even know yet if you're going to hire these people, and you're already checking references. These pre-employment tests has to do with, if you say must know QuickBooks, then you can test them on QuickBooks at the interview. So that's not necessarily like drug tests or criminal background. That's nothing like that. This is more related to the job. So the other thing is, if you're checking them for typing results or a 10 key or accounting. The other thing is, conduct follow-up interviews. We recommend that you do maybe a phone interview and then a follow-up interview. But again, this is just a recommended process. You can do it however, but keep something in order and have a checklist for yourself on how you're going to do things. And then select candidate and negotiate an offer. And that's regarding with how you're going to pay them or what benefits you're going to offer, if any, things of that nature. Any questions regarding the process of recruiting? Okay.
You're going to go over some of the legal ramifications of that?
Of recruiting? Yeah. So the next slide has to do with laws. We're going to go into these a little bit further on, but I do want to mention that when you're advertising, the job description that you're using could be used against you if there's anything that's discriminatory. So you have to... I'm sorry?
Haven't been down that road.
Oh, okay.
Other one.
So make sure, that's why it's important that it's related to job performance and not to the type of person you want to hire. So we're going to talk about these laws a little bit further along in the other presentation, but understand that that could be used against you. And all it takes is, if I'm offended by an ad in the newspaper, I can call the EEOC and say, look, they're saying that they want, a 6-foot blonde lady. That's already, that's offensive to me. They'll start investigating. As well as if you're putting something online or anything like that. So anywhere you put that job description or announcement, make sure that you're within the laws. You cannot put, must be 25 years of age. You cannot put that. That is against the law. We'll talk about this further along. Any examples you want to use?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Guy comes to work for us, a major construction company, and we're advertising for a truck driver. The truck driver is required to have Class A license and pass a medical exam on their own. But part of this truck driving job requires that they get up in the bed of a dump truck and make sure that it's clean before they put the asphalt in there. Guy shows up and he's 300 pounds. He can't even get his foot in the bottom of the tire, because we provide handles on the side of the truck for them to go on the tire, on the top of the tire, up. He can't even get on the tire, and we don't hire him because he can't do what we advertised, and we got sued.
Really?
We won, we prevailed, but we had to defend against that.
And how did you win? Because of the documentation you had?
We told him in our ad, must be able to get into the truck and clean the bed.
So if you had not done that, you would not have prevailed.
We would have had a much more difficult time.
Right.
And I could quote you some others, but that's the first one that comes to mind.
Absolutely, and people ask me all the time. This comes up a lot. with foreign nationals. They do things differently in other countries, and they want to do things their way here. And we have to say, absolutely not. You cannot say, young, female, blonde. You cannot say that. So again, we're going to go over the laws a little bit. So I'm just going to cover them briefly. So the EEOC protects against discrimination regarding race, religion, military service, gender, age, and disability. Does anybody know what the age discrimination, what the age limit is, or the minimum limit?
There is no.
There actually is, and it's 40. 40. So people over 40 are protected under the age discrimination law.
What do you mean? The minimum.
Right. So if I go apply for a job and I'm 45 and somebody that's 25 goes to apply for a job and they get it because whatever, they know about social media or something, but that was not part of the job description or something, I can have a case and say, well, they didn't hire me because I was too old. And maybe 40 is too young in some people's perspective, but there has been cases against 40 and above. So a lot of people won't hire 60, 70-year-olds, let's say, for example, because they may think, well, they don't know a lot about computers, or they may think they don't know a lot about social media. Well, that's discrimination. It shouldn't be based on that. It should be based on their job performance. There has been cases about discrimination for younger individuals that don't know certain things. So the example I use, because my mother's in accounting, is that people out of college, for example, and I don't know what you all were talking about when I came in, but I think it was related to the younger generation. People out of college don't have as much experience, but they may have a master's, and they may get hired at an accounting firm, but that doesn't necessarily mean they know everything that, in my case, my example, my mother, she's been doing accounting since she was 12 years old. She can tell you inside and outside and backwards. She can tell you how to calculate things because she learned accounting the old school way. So she can tell you what's going on in QuickBooks because she understands the accounting background of it. Whereas somebody that comes in and knows only the computerized version, they don't understand certain things. So possibly if that firm didn't hire younger individuals, they could say, well, they're not hiring because I don't know this or I don't know that or whatever. So there is cases for younger individuals, but the only protected class is 40 and over. Okay? But there is a limit.
When you said there's a limit, I thought you meant like
the other way.
A limit to they cannot sue you. Like I can work at 70. Doesn't matter. There's no limit.
There's no limit. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. A limit. Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination. Okay, we already went through that. Americans with Disability Act prohibits discrimination based on disabilities or perceived disabilities. And that's another thing. You cannot ask them what their disability is. So if they say, I have a disability, if they want you to make accommodations for them to be able to do the job, it has to be within reason for you. So they can't tell you, you need to make accommodations and buy a $3,000 computer. That's not within reason. You can't afford that. But if they say, well, I need a different chair or I need to stand up frequently, things like that. But one thing I do want to mention about disabilities is that you cannot ask them what their disability is. And so people say, oh, well, I didn't see any disability. Well, it could be a mental disability. It could be something psychological. So you cannot ask them as a business owner what their disability is. And so if they say, I'm disabled, well, then you ask them, right, because you have a job description, are you able to meet the requirements on this job description?
You see me hiring the bipolar marketing. Where are we going with that, right?
So then, okay, so age discrimination we talked about, and equal pay mandates that men and women that do equal work must receive equal wages. Okay?
How about you want somebody for your house? Yeah, this is not a business, but...
Well, but you are an employer if you hire domestic.
Right.
That's something
right.
different, yeah.
And, of course, you have children, and you rather have a lady to take care of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I
I got asked that question regarding the...
And besides, my husband wouldn't let another man.
I actually got asked that by a child daycare organization that I was presenting at, and they told me that in the end they found that the guy, because he was a young guy, actually turned out to be a very good employee. So it depends. It depends on your, let's use that example of a daycare. they never said to the parents, we're only going to have females, we're only going to have this or that. I understand it's uncomfortable, and if you can make a case for that position, remember, there's laws. You have to make a case against it to protect yourself. And the burden of proof falls on you as a business owner. So if you can make a case because you're uncomfortable because your children are all daughters or things like that, then remember there's a law against it, but you have to be able to defend why you're doing it. And so an example would be like his. He was able to defend himself because he had something to back it up. I know people talk about Hooters and why there's only women and they can wear those uniforms, things like that. Well, from my understanding, what Hooters did, and I haven't found it, but apparently this is what they did, they made a case for themselves and they said, you have to be able to get into this uniform, which let's assume is a size 0, So if a man went in there, he wouldn't be able to fit into that uniform. Or I don't know how they defended themselves, but they used wording that they were able to defend themselves because they could make a case for why they needed for that uniform to be in place. And it is because that's their business. That's what they're attracting, right? A specific type of man, and their customer is wanting a specific type of appearance, and that I guess that's how they made a case for themselves.
Proved the niche market.
Right. They proved that was their customer, and that's what their customers wanted. So again, you can do it as long as you can defend yourself. So I'm sorry, I don't have more legal. But, employment attorneys, this is what they fight, things like this. And I don't know if you hired an employment attorney, but that's what they fight. And these types of cases are always in the court. And right now, it's growing. The employment law is growing really, really fast all over the country. I mean, maybe it hasn't hit South Texas, but it is growing really, really fast. And I say that. I just came from a conference in June in Chicago, and it was all attorneys talking about different cases. So absolutely, you can make a case for yourself, but be able to defend it. Okay, step number 3, developing human resources. So these are some of the, let me make sure. Okay. So some of the steps you take when you're developing your human resources, and we're going to talk about each one individually: orientation, training, development, and performance evaluation. So the first one, training familiarizes new employees with the company mission, vision, products, etc. So the last thing you want, and I've had this happen where I go into a job and I'm like, where's the restroom? Because nobody took me around, and I'm holding it because I'm thinking, well, I need to ask for permission or what's going on. Nobody took me around to say, this is the restroom, this is the lunchroom, this is the back exit. You need to provide that for your employees. Don't, just assume they know, and take the time to do it. Also, take them around and introduce them to the other employees. Tell them, this is, Maria, and she's a receptionist, and this is so-and-so, and she does bookkeeping. Explain what's going on. Because if I feel lost, I'm not going to feel comfortable with doing my job if I'm always thinking, well, I don't know who to talk to, and I don't know who anybody is. And then, of course, you want them to be comfortable within the environment that you have. Training is different. There's different types of training, and it's really teaching the employees to do specific job-related tasks. So on-the-job training is kind of, you already hired them, they're there at your job or at your business, and you're kind of going through the motions with them, and they're learning as they go, which is how a lot of people get trained, especially down here and especially with small businesses. Computer-based online training would be something like a webinar or a seminar online, or even in some cases, actual testing seminars, where if you want to test their knowledge. I know that when I started here, with regard to SBA loans, there's online webinars that'll test your knowledge at the end, or we have webinars that test your knowledge at the end, and that's just to show that you met those guidelines or that you understand what's going on. Off-the-job training, off-the-job training would be if they send you somewhere else. So if you want to, I know, like, I work for the TABC, the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission. My first day on the job was not here in McAllen, where I was based out of. It was in Austin. I went somewhere else to learn everything. So when I got back, I was already trained, so I could start working as soon as I got back. I was over there for 3 weeks, But that's where I was learning everything. They were going through all the motions, everything I would be dealing with, but at a different site. So in some cases, some companies will send their salespeople to a training somewhere else, especially like we see a lot of franchises. So maybe how to operate the system or how to use their equipment, things like that. That's off-the-job training. And then simulation training, an example of this would be at a call center where you actually are taking phone calls, but it's not really a customer. It's somebody pretending to be a customer. Or in my case, you know, my simulation training was my boss pretended to be a client, and I had to kind of go through the motions of her being a client, and we didn't, you know, get off of that. She was a client through the whole hour. So that's simulation. Like you pretend to be a client or a customer and then kind of go through the motions and see how they react. I mean, and it wasn't easy because they can throw things at you and they want to see if you're prepared, and that's what you want to do.
Not my job.
It's not your job.
Oh, no, we just had that course.
Professional development is a little bit different, and it's normally, you know, higher level managers or professionals. And really what this is I keep using accounting as an example, or even HR. You know, so my professional development is going to conferences and seminars outside of the area to learn more about HR. So an accountant, maybe they go to the IRS trainings or things like that. That's not necessarily related to the job, but it helps the development for that specific job at that time. But in the future, that individual takes that training with them. So everything I've learned, I'm going to take with me, but it helps me now as well. Professional development sometimes could be as easily as going to, you know, a training here. That this is part of professional development for you all. So keep that in mind. It's different from training because training is related to the job specifically there at your place of business, but development could be outside of that, but it helps your business. And then performance evaluations, process of assessing an employee's performance to goals and objectives. For those of you that are in business, do you do professional evaluations? You do. You do? You don't? You don't? Did you say you had employees? Okay. It's not a requirement by law, and a lot of people that are in business, small businesses especially, don't do it, but maybe they don't have job descriptions. So if you have a job description and you're having problems with an employee, how do you tell them you're doing a good job or not if you don't do evaluations? And again, it's not required by law, but this is all part of a process for you to be able to protect yourself, right? So you've gone through the whole process. You have a job description, they're not meeting it. You did an evaluation, you told them they weren't meeting it. So now are you in a position to let them go? If you have all of these things in place? Probably. So keep that in mind, that all of this is related and it's for an end result. So either they're doing a great job and you can give them a raise, or they're not doing a good job and you can let them go. So either way, you have something in place to protect yourself. And I think of it, I mean, I don't mean to be negative towards the employees because I'm a big proponent of employee rights, but I also am a proponent for the small business owner, and that I think that we don't put things in place that protect us. And I've heard lots of stories, especially when I work for the Texas workforce, when people would tell me, business owners would tell me, well, my secretary said minimum wage was $8. Why are you listening to your secretary? You know, you're the business owner. You should know these things. Don't let your employees tell you how to run your business. So I've seen so many stories like that that's why I'm a big proponent for you protecting yourself. And because this is going to come back to you when it has to do with unemployment claims or an audit from the Department of Labor or the IRS or anything like that. These are ways to protect yourself. So one of the last steps is compensating your employees. There's two different ways. One is financial and one is non-financial. The financial, of course, is wages, commission, salary. We're going to talk about them in a little bit. Bonuses and profit sharing. Benefits is non-financial, which is, again, there's no requirement as of right now that says you have to require benefits or you have to offer benefits. I emphasize as of right now because it's related to healthcare reform. You might have to do something in the future, and as a matter of fact, there is requirements as of October 1st. So I'm going to do a little plug here. We're having a healthcare reform conference here that's going to help you understand what your requirements are as a business owner with relation to healthcare reform, about offering healthcare benefits and things of that nature. You may not be required to, but I at least want you to be aware. So as of right now, there's nothing that says that you have to give them benefits. So that would be health insurance, 401k. You don't have to offer vacation or sick pay or anything like that. Again, as of right now. Let me just say, with regard to this and with regard to the laws, different types of industries could be required to meet these requirements depending on the type of industry. So for example, if you're doing government contracting, they may say you're required to do this thing or that thing. Also based on the number of employees that you have. So I forgot to mention that earlier, but keep in mind that depending on what industry you're in and how many employees you have, that could affect whether or not you're required. Generally, small business owners, I would say, have 2 to 3 employees are not required. But that doesn't mean that if you're in construction, you won't be required, or if you're in the restaurant industry, you won't be required. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Yes, sir?
You're not required to do maternity leave?
No.
That's the FMLA,
Right.
but that's for 50 and above
Right.
only, right?
Everything has a number, and I didn't bring that table, but I can certainly email you the link that has that information, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So keep in mind, so when you hear that you're required as business owners to offer certain things with regard to healthcare, that is all related to healthcare reform, and it's still going on. They're still fighting that, and there's changes coming up. We had this conference, I think, in the fall or in the spring, in January, I think, and it's already changed. So months later, it's already changed. So keep in mind to keep, right, and it's going to change, and, you know, right. So, I mean, it's going on and on and on. The other thing is, people ask me all the time, is minimum wage? I just had somebody ask me yesterday if minimum wage was changing. This is going to make national news. So don't just assume that your friend or your employee told you, so it must be right. We're going to talk about it in the other presentation about how you can check all of this.
So what's the bottom line for workman's comp?
For workman's comp,
Yeah.
most industries are not required to offer workman's comp.
I thought there was a statute that said if your payroll was so much, if you were a number of employees, you were required to provide.
In Texas, you're not required to.
But you are liable.
If something
You don't have
happens,
workers' comp
right,
insurance, employers are liable for
right.
what you discussed.
If something happens.
Okay, thanks.
So the financial aspects, wages is pretty self-explanatory, which is really how you're paying them and based on the hours they work. Commission is incentive system that pays a fixed amount or a percentage of the employee's sales. So that's more related to sales. It could be in different industries, the number of members, but it's also related to sales. Because I see a lot of gyms do it on membership, which is sales, but they call it membership. And of course, things like auto dealers, it's commission. Salary, which is on a weekly, monthly, or annual basis. Bonuses, compensation offered by companies for exceptional performance. It has to be related to performance and not just because, or I'm just going to give it to this one just because I like them. It has to be related to performance. And then profit sharing, which is a percentage of company profits is distributed to employees whose work helped generate the profits. That's normally with big business. So I worked at Kmart, I worked at JCPenney, we got profit shares in those big industries. Okay, the final step for this section is separation from the company. Remember I mentioned for every employee, they're going to leave either voluntarily or involuntarily. Let me see what's next. Okay, so voluntary separation is resignation and retirement. So the resignation, the employee voluntarily requests to leave the company, and retirement is normally based on benefits, but they could just decide to retire because they've met the age for the federal retirement or Social Security benefits. But normally it's voluntarily. The question I get asked here all the time is, what if they don't give me the 2 weeks notice? There's no law that says that they have to give you 2 weeks notice. They can leave tomorrow if they want. Just the same, you can fire them tomorrow if you want, because in the state of Texas, it is an at-will state, which means you can fire them or they can leave at any point that they want. Now, other issues come into play, but we already talked about all the things you're going to do to protect yourself if that happens. And then involuntary separation is termination and layoff. Termination is normally, their job performance is not meeting your requirements. Layoff is normally related to economical reasons. So if the business is not doing well and you have to let 2 or 3 people go, that's a layoff. It's not their choice, but the business can no longer support paying them. Or maybe a layoff is because you're closing your business. So it's not always negative, but keep that in mind. These are the reasons normally that people go apply for unemployment. We're going to talk about unemployment further along. But the question I get asked here is, how do we keep them from applying, or how do they qualify or not qualify? So you've done everything, right? You have your job description, you've trained them, you're doing evaluations, and if you have an issue with them, you're disciplining them by documenting what's going on. So now when they go apply for unemployment and they say, well, she fired me and I don't know why, you have all that documentation to present, and they're going to send you a letter and say, what's your side of the story? That's not what it says, but basically that's what they want to know. So you have everything in place to show them, and that's how you defend yourself. Now, I don't know if you all understand how unemployment works. Okay, we're going to talk about it further, but I'm going to go over it briefly. Unemployment is like a car insurance. The more benefits that are paid out because of your doing, because you laid them off and it was not their fault, the higher you're going to pay in taxes. The rates are less than 1%. I think it's like 0.8% up to 8%. So the higher is because you have a lot of layoffs, and it's been determined that these individuals qualified and that the layoff was no fault of their own. So again, when you get those notices, if you don't respond, that means that you're not arguing that, and they're going to get benefits. The benefits come from the employer's accounts, not necessarily from a fund that's just sitting there. So people don't understand that, but it does affect you. So if you're paying less than 1% in taxes, that's a huge difference when you're paying 8%. Usually 8% is for companies that have a lot of seasonal workers, like farm labor, construction, retail. They have really high rates. But smaller businesses, there's really no reason because you don't have a lot of turnover. Any questions about unemployment? I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I wanted to mention that.
Kind of lags too.
Yes, it's based on 5 quarters, and they take the previous 4 quarters. So there's 1 quarter, and that's a little bit technical, but I just want you to know that it's going to be based on everybody they worked for in those 5 quarters. So when they go in and say, I want to apply for unemployment, they're going to look at basically the last year and a half. Yes, you were going to ask me a question?
So once you have employees, you're supposed to be paying.
Yes,
into insurance.
Right, and we're going to talk about that in the other presentation.
Yeah, it's a complicated formula, because my experience is it's based on, let's say you're at the 5%. You're paying 5% on your entire payroll.
Right.
Right? So if you lay off 1 or 2 people, that's not going to affect your rate.
Right,
Your rate's
because
going to stay 5%. But if you lay off half of your people, then in the next year, your rate's going to go up, and you're going to pay that until such time as another year passes and you didn't lay off anybody, then it'll go back to 5%.
Right, and it's actually 3 years.
3 years, that's what I was thinking.
Right.
It's 3 years.
So it stays on your account with the unemployment taxes for 3 years. So that's really hard, which means that for 3 years, you're going to be paying a higher rate. So you could have the lowest rate this year, and come December, come January, it's going to change to 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more. So keep that in mind. So again, the point of all of that is that you have to have documentation to protect yourself. Because if you say, I fired them because they come in late, okay, what documentation do you have that they came in late? If you have nothing, how do you defend yourself? But on your job description, it says, required to work from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, and they're here at 8:30 every day. That's already something that you can write them up for, because they're not meeting the requirements, right? That's the whole process. This is actually the last slide of this presentation. I want you to make the connection of why it's important to have all of these in place. It doesn't have to be something very formal or pretty or anything, but have something in writing. You can create it yourself on Word, but put something in writing. Anytime you document, it's not in here, but I'm going to say this. Anytime you document because of a discipline issue, don't just put she was late on Wednesday. So-and-so was late on Wednesday, whatever date, 8/15/13. She was scheduled to be here at 8. She came in at 8:30. Put details.
This is the third incident.
And they sign.
Exactly.
And the employee doesn't have to be notified, or do they?
That you're keeping track? No. But when you sit down with them, you're going to let them know. This is a list of things that I have, because you've been keeping track. So, again, you want to keep track and then write them up if you have to, have a conference with them if you have to, but make sure to include details. Because how do you defend yourself if, say, she was late on Wednesday? What Wednesday? What year was this? Was this last year? Was this last week? If you don't have details, how do you protect yourself? How do you defend yourself? So I hope it makes sense why the process is so important for you as business owners or employers, because, again, it comes back to you. Trust me, I know. It comes back to you. Any questions regarding any of this? We're going to go into the payroll compliance, which is even more detailed. Yes?
What are your thoughts on an employee handbook?
Okay. What about it? Look, I do employee handbooks. I help clients with employee handbooks. If you're going to enforce what's in an employee handbook, absolutely. If you have a big enough staff and you know that you're going to enforce it, then absolutely, let's put together an employee handbook. But don't put it together just because you want to have it there or be official or professional. Because if you're not going to enforce it, what's the point of having it? The other thing is, if you have it and you're not enforcing it, it could be used against you. So, I do recommend employee handbooks for employers that are in that position or ready to put that together. But my other recommendation is you can put policies and procedures in place for your for your workplace that could substitute for an employee handbook. So all employees are required to be here from 8 to 5, things like that. Have a meeting, present it to everybody, have them initial that they read it and understood it. That's another way you could do it, but you don't need an employee handbook at that point. What we're seeing more and more, and I've been working on them more and more, is because franchises are now requiring that when a franchisee starts a franchise, that they have an employee handbook in place. So that's how important it is now, if they're requiring it of their franchisees. Okay. Hope that answered. Any questions else? Anything else? So remember I mentioned that there's different websites that can give you information on job descriptions. So onetonline.org is one of them. And this is part of your presentation, I think, that you'll be able to get. Salary.com, SHRM.org, and then the laws, EEOC.gov. But I'm going to give you more details on that. But you go to them like ONET Online, and you type in secretary, and it'll bring you a list of secretary job descriptions, and you can look at them and say, okay, this looks like something that I would use, and amend it, change it, revise it. But anytime you're revising it, write in terms of the job performance. That keeps you away from discriminating or having issues with discrimination. Okay? And again, we can help you as well. So in summary, employees are a necessary resource. One of the things I talk about in my small business, startup seminars is that business owners don't realize how overwhelming it really is to have employees, because it's not just about hiring somebody and having them work for you. There's a lot of responsibilities tied to having employees. This is just a process. We're going to get into the taxes and the requirements of compliance, but keep in mind that this is going to be part of your daily job as well. And it's not even just about the compliance or the laws and things like that. It's also managing personalities, in some cases taking care of your employees, babysitting, having to deal with problems amongst each other, things like that. So you need to keep all of this in mind. And if you know that you can't do this or that you'd rather not do this, then hire somebody that will. Okay, any questions regarding HR? Okay. So my name is Cristina Cantu. I'm a business advisor with the Small Business Development Center. This presentation we're going to talk about today, we've talked a little bit about HR, the process, but now we're going to talk about payroll compliance. So one of the questions I get asked the most is, how do I know what to take out, or how many dependents they're going to have, and things like that. So this is where I'm going to teach you or go through the process of that for you. A lot of it is going to be you understanding who to ask the right questions to. Some of this we already talked about in the other presentation, but I'm going to sound like a drill sergeant because I'm going to keep drilling this stuff into you, right? I'm going to keep talking about documentation and having a job description and things of that nature, but it's because I want you to understand and I want you to protect yourself. I really do think having employees is an asset for your business. They're considered a resource for your business, but you need to understand how to manage everything related to your employees and why it's important for your business. I always say if you didn't have your employees, your business probably wouldn't be as successful as it is. And that's because they're in the front, they're selling, they're taking care of your customers, and you want to have a good rapport and relationship with your employees. Okay, so I think we're ready to start. Some of this is going to be, remember, this is a presentation I go through with people that are just starting out. Some of this is going to be repetitive for you. I talked about what our objective is for this presentation. Provide steps to meet payroll compliance, that's number one. Cover general, federal, and state requirements. Understand the agencies and what their authority is. Discuss other laws, guidelines, and requirements, and become familiar with the resources available. A lot of people don't know where to go to ask these questions. I don't know, do you all know that there's a Department of Labor you can go ask questions to down here? There's an office for workers' compensation, the IRS office, the tax office for unemployment taxes. So there's resources, it's just knowing where they are. So we're going to go through all of this. I just want to give you a disclaimer. The information contained herein is for general guidance only. It is the responsibility of the business owner to determine and obey all applicable legal requirements as established by the governing agencies themselves. What that means is I could have something in here that could change next week. So you can't hold me liable for that because it's your responsibility to go ask and make sure with every agency that you have questions about, right? So again, healthcare reform. So we're not going to know until that law goes into place. So some of what I have here, I'm trying to keep up with it, but some of what I have in here may change next month because of healthcare reform. So I want to make sure that you understand that some of this information could change just because the laws change. 2 years ago, we had some changes. I've had to make some updates ever since. The start of this year, we had some changes to tax requirements, so I had to make some changes. So it changes all the time. Even though we try to keep up, and it does make national news, I want to make sure you understand it's always a good practice for you to go ask that agency or go to their website and check to make sure. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is this presentation is only for business owners who have employees. We will not discuss contract labor or workers' classification. To resolve issues related to classification, contact the agencies. What that means is sometimes I'll have a class and they'll tell me, but I have all of my employees as contract labor. Then they're not your employees if you're telling me they're contract labor. They're either contract labor or they're employees. So that's not something we're going to discuss, but I want to make sure that you understand what that means. Either they're contract labor, which means they're subcontractors. In most cases, they're self-employed. That's separate from you as a business owner who has workers who are your employees. So this whole presentation, everything we talk about is related to basically your workers or your employees. No contract labor. Okay, any questions? Yes.
Contract labor as in the agencies?
How do you know that?
Contract labor is that I sometimes, when I would do audits, I would go to a business and they say, well, my secretary is contract labor. Okay, why is she contract labor? That means you don't pay taxes. You don't pay taxes on contract labor. And they would say, well, because she's part-time. That's not a reason for your employee to be contract labor. Contract labor, an example would be if I have a restaurant and I hire an electrician to come and do work for me, that's contract labor. I'm contracting somebody to provide me a service that I don't have in-house, right? Or a plumber or an AC guy. That's contract labor. That's something you can write a check for and not pay taxes on, because that's an expense for your business. That's not your secretary. I even had a restaurant that had the waiters and waitresses as contract labor. How is that possible? I go to your restaurant, I see all of these workers that I assume that are your employees, and you're telling me they're contract labor? Contract labor, independent contractors, subcontractors, that means they're not your employees. Okay? Yes?
I have a question. Just individuals use from time to time, right?
Yes. And it could, in some cases, like a graphic designer or a computer tech that you're using frequently, they come to your office a lot because you have a lot of issues. So I don't want that to be the only factor, but that is one factor. It's usually somebody, like an electrician would only come when you have problems, right? It could be once a year, it could be twice a year. Or an IT guy, a computer guy could come every week because you have problems every week. But they are normally self-employed. You can ask for their federal identification number and their business cards and an invoice for their services. That's, again, how you protect yourselves.
Okay. You will be raising a flag for an audit if you continue doing that, right?
Well, what happens is, keep your question, what happens is, let's say this example that I used, the secretary is my contract labor. The secretary quits and she goes to apply for an employment. And she says, I used to work for ABC Inc. And then the people that at unemployment look up ABC Inc. and there's no worker by that name, no Social Security by that number. That prompts an investigation. Or if she calls the Department of Labor and says, they never paid me overtime because they have me as contract labor, that prompts an investigation. So it does happen. Things like that prompt an investigation. So then they send auditors in to go investigate, and that's one of the things I did. I'd go in and say, okay, well, they're saying they're an employee and you're saying they're not. I need to see your records, and then we determine if it is or if it isn't. So the things I'm going to ask is for you to prove to me that they're contract labor. And if you tell me they work 25 hours, they answer my phones, they use my desk, they use my office equipment, how can that be a contract labor? But if you tell me it's an electrician, they came to do a job for me, I was having problems, they had to redo the whole thing, it took them a week, that's why it's a check for $1,000, then you can prove to me that, or in the case when I used to work there, you could prove to me that that was contract labor. So somebody you contract for services outside of what you do.
Okay.
Okay.
My question is, I have it's a party room and we do decorations outside, balloons and all that. It's my own family, my brother-in-law, my sister, and so on. So they're not really at the place, but when I do have a party, like I had one yesterday, and they came and helped me. They brought tables and moon jumps and they inflated balloons and all that. And I usually give them, pay them. Will that be contract? No? But it's not like
it's just a temporary worker, right? It's just a laborer that comes in on a temporary basis. I mean, there's no exemption for employees. They could work for you for 1 hour in one day. And I've seen that. I saw that when I worked there. So it doesn't matter how often they work for you or how much they work for you or how much they get paid or anything like that. So understand, somebody that's contract labor legitimately through the Department of Labor, IRS, Texas Workforce, normally you have to be able to prove that they're not an employee and the burden of proof falls on you.
So
this is just a laborer.
Okay, so they're my employee?
For that day, they're your employees. Now, if I were your customer, I would assume that they're your employees, right?
what about if I pay Waiter Inc. to have 6 waiters for each
but
one of my
that's Waiter
shifts?
Inc. and it's probably a temp agency or a staff agency, and yes, that's okay.
That's
because
a
you
contract.
contracted that company to provide you that service. They're not your employees. They're under the direction and control of that company. And there's a lot of factors. That's kind of why I don't like to go into it. But right now, it's a hot button issue. That's why I bring it up. So everybody's coming down because you're not reporting people as employees. They're not paying taxes as employees, right? Or people that are getting paid under the table because they're contract labor. Who's paying taxes on that? That's why the IRS is coming down on all that, because they want their taxes. They want their money, right? So again, everything related that we're talking about in these presentations, we're under the assumption that they're your employees. If you have questions or issues, then I highly recommend you direct it to whoever you need to contact. So the Department of Labor, IRS, or the Workforce Commission.
Is there a floor, dollar-wise or hour-wise?
No. So they could work, again, for you for 1 hour in one day. Let's say
They
you...
can make up to $2,000 a year.
No.
You have to claim it.
That is related to the liability requirements for tax compliance. Okay. Any other questions regarding that?
It's because I'm trying to figure out what I have to do then if they are, because they do other jobs. I mean, they
Right.
just
But I mean,
do-
I work here full time, and I could have a part-time job at McDonald's, working 20 hours a week, right? So that's just another part-time job.
Even if sometimes if I need them, they can't come, because sometimes I have to get somebody else.
Right, and it's kind of what a temporary agency does. They just hire people for a couple of hours, a couple of days. So, yes, I mean,
Okay,
they're
and to
workers.
pay them then, I cannot write a check from my.
You can pay them however you want, but you still have to meet minimum wage, and you still have to report their information for tax purposes. And so we won't get too much into that. I mean, we can talk afterwards, but so I just kind of want to put that out there, okay? I know it's a hot button issue, and I know it brings up a lot of questions. Just so you know, there are over 400 federal laws pertaining to employee rights and selections. Every state is different. We happen to follow the federal laws regarding minimum wage and overtimes and things of that nature, but other states are either more strict. Other states have minimum wage that's $8 or $9. So every state is different. So it doesn't pertain to you unless you have employees in other states, because even if you're here, you could possibly be liable for the requirements in those states. So if you're a big company and you have employees in Louisiana and California, you could see different laws for every state. So be careful once you start hiring outside of your Texas in this case, because that possibly could mean you have other requirements. The other thing is laws can apply to employers based on different parameters. So the number of employees, we talked about FMLA, and then that's based on the number of employees. Government contracts, they have very strict guidelines and they require certain things. Workers' compensation might be one of them. Bonding, insurance might be another thing. So if you're a government contractor, that means you do work for the government. It could be the university, for example. It could be the city. It could be the school district. Those are governments or municipalities. So you could potentially have other requirements. And then industry types. Construction is going to have different requirements than a CPA office. They may have requirements related to OSHA. They may have requirements related to workers' compensation or insurance, where an accountant's office is not going to have those requirements. Okay. The other factor is, some laws apply differently depending on the type of business structure you are. So if you're a sole proprietor and it's your husband and your wife, you could have different requirements. Maybe your kids are not considered your employees, or your parents are not considered employees. So there could be different laws depending on the type of business structure that you have. So in payroll compliance, the very first step is to obtain a federal identification number. The reason is this is going to be your identifier for any payroll reports that you file. Now, if you've been in business and you've already been in business several years and you have a federal identification number but you've never had employees, all you have to do is start filing the forms that you can get off the internet, or contact the IRS and let them know that you will be having employees. Normally, when you set up your federal identification number, there's a question there. I believe it says, will you have W-2 wages? If you answer yes, that'll prompt them to start sending you the payroll forms, the tax reports. And it'll tell you on the letter with your federal identification number, it'll tell you these are the forms you're going to be required to submit. 940, 941, which we're going to talk about. But I want you to understand, if you already have a federal ID number and you do not have employees, contact them so they can start sending you the forms, or download the forms and start submitting them. Because that is not going to fly as an excuse as I didn't know, because you're responsible, right? You're responsible to know these things. So I want to make that clear. Right. Ignorance of the law is no defense. I didn't want to say that, but yes. So the federal identification number is how you will file your 940, 941, your W-2s, and even in some cases the 1099s for contract labor, even though we're not talking about contract labor, right? Okay. Step number 2, and this is another hot button issue, is to verify employees' eligibility, which means the U.S. law requires companies to employ only individuals who may legally work in the U.S. So the way you verify is that you and the employee complete a Form I-9. So my best recommendation for the I-9 is for you to Google or request the booklet that comes with the I-9, and it's 69 to 70-something pages, but you'll have all of the instructions. That's important because U.S. Customs and Immigration Services is doing a lot of I-9 audits right now. They're picking industries, or they're finding a lot of problems in specific industries, and they're going after companies. that every error could potentially be a fine, every single error. Some auditors, from my understanding, will give you a fine for the whole page. Some will give you individual errors. So if you misspell something, you put the wrong number somewhere, you change a date, something like that, that could potentially be an error. That's why my recommendation is that you download the booklet so that you have everything. Any questions about the I-9? The I-9 booklet and the instructions will tell you what you're responsible for as an employer. It's going to tell you you have to look at one of these documents to determine, to the best of your ability and knowledge, that this individual is eligible to work in the U.S. Okay?
I got a question.
Okay, go ahead.
It says Department of Homeland Security there at the bottom.
Uh-huh.
Did they produce this form?
That's part of the agency that it falls under.
Okay. Did they, this little...
No. I just put the information regarding the agencies.
I'm curious. It says, refrain, in the second paragraph, refrain from discriminating against individuals on the basis of citizenship?
Of national origin or
Forget the
citizenship?
national origin.
Oh, okay.
Let's talk about citizenship.
Uh-huh.
How does an employer discriminate against citizenship?
I'm thinking that's related to if they're a Mexican citizen, but they have permission to work in the U.S. Some people may not want to hire, like maybe they're resident aliens or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they're here, but they're not U.S. citizens. And I know kind of what you were thinking, U.S. citizen, but yeah.
I can tell you a shorter story, but
I
I'll
was
tell you on
thinking,
break.
like how the conflicts with the Middle East, like say somebody from Iraq and is here,
Right.
his citizenship is Iraq.
Right,
So
but they have
Iraq,
permission to
but
be here.
They have, so we can discriminate against
They have a
them.
work visa.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions regarding the I-9? So the other thing I want to mention here is that it's normally recommended that you do it on the first day. Why? Because I've seen cases where an employer will hire somebody and in the half day, the employee decides, you know what, I don't want to work here. And they leave and you never got these documents. You're still responsible to get these documents, to have them because you paid them, you hired them. But if you didn't get them that first day, within that first hour. So let's go back to the process. You're going to do the orientation and you're going to have them complete the forms, right? Because again, this is all a process and it's all related. What I was going to mention about this, with regard to the application, you can ask them, are you eligible to work in the United States? Because you're not going to ask them, are you a U.S. citizen? You're going to ask them, are you eligible to work in the United States? Now, if they say yes, and you find out later, that's grounds for you not to hire them or for you to fire them because they lied or they falsified a document. Okay? So keep that in mind. Any questions? Okay. So this is what it looks like. I could only fit the top portion because it's really long and it's 2 pages. But what I wanted to mention is that this was just updated this year. So for those of you that already have employees, already completed I-9s, sometimes we make copies because we make packets for our new employees. Make sure it's the most updated because, again, they can fine you if you're using the wrong form. So make sure you have the most recent copy. Step number 3 is regarding the Social Security number. Now, regarding the Social Security number, what you're verifying is that the information that's on the Social Security card that they presented to you is what the Social Security Administration has. So an example of that would be, I normally just use Cristina Cantu. I fill out applications that way. I fill out documents that way. My full name is Maria Cristina Cantu. That's what's on my Social Security card. So once they determined that, the university, what they did is they changed my name, but they had every right to do that, right? But you don't want to get a Social Security card that says Juan Rodriguez and then you verify it and it says Maria Cristina Cantu because you already know that's not correct, right? So you want to make sure that what's on that Social Security card is what the Social Security Administration has on their records. You want to make sure the number is correct. You want to make sure the name is correct because you're going to use this information for when you complete the W-2s at the end of the year. Okay? So this is different from eligibility. Now we're verifying the information. We already determined that they're eligible to work, and now we're verifying the information, which is information is a federal identifier, the Social Security number. So we want to make sure that that information is correct. Okay? Now, I had a question yesterday about Social Security cards. I've looked high and dry to find out if it says you're required to make a copy of a Social Security card or you're not allowed. I cannot find anything that says either or. So as of right now, you can make a copy. A lot of people do because they want to show, this is what they showed me, this is what I'm using. But again, keep this information under lock and key because it's confidential information. And then people ask me all the time, well, what could happen? Well, if there's identity theft, they could say, well, he had my information, things like that. So just make sure that you have this under lock and key, as well as all of this documentation that we're talking about. There's different methods to verify Social Security information. You can call, you can mail it in. Magnetic tape is old school, but they still use it. I know a lot of CPA firms use it. Or you can go online to register. Now, when you register, they want you to understand that this information should only be used for work purposes or verifying the Social Security information. In other words, I can't go in there and look at stuff for my ex-boyfriend or anything like that. Okay? So this is a little bit more complicated. The next step is to set up the employee's withholding and federal taxes. So now we're going to determine how much is going to be taken out of their payroll check. The way you do that is two ways. One, I'm sorry? QuickBooks. One way is to obtain a Form W-4. That is where they tell you how many dependents they will be having and how many exemptions they want. Okay? One thing about the W-form is that you as a business owner do not tell them, hey, put 0 because then they're going to take out more or less or anything like that. You do not tell them. You're not their accountant. You're not their tax preparer. Do not give them advice regarding that. Because they could come back and say, she told me or he told me, and then they took out more taxes and I need money. You know, they could come back and use it against you. Again, I'm thinking about you all and protecting you all, right? Do not give them legal advice, accounting advice. And tell them, talk to your tax preparer, talk to your accountant, or call the IRS. I cannot give you advice regarding how many exemptions, okay? So we're going to talk about everything that's on here, but in further along. I mentioned to you this should be part of your packet as far as the forms you're going to be getting when? The first day, probably as soon as possible. As soon as they come in after your orientation, you're going to get this information. Or maybe this before your orientation, but within the first couple of hours. You want to have this information. This is a big one because, again, if you pay them, you want to take that payroll expense. How can you do that if you can't even report it because you never got the form? So make sure to get this information. The other thing you take out from their payroll check is Social Security, Medicare, Social Security and Medicare, which are legally required by the government. So it's not just the income tax withholding, which is based on the W-4, but now it's Social Security and Medicare as well. This form you don't mail anywhere, as well as the I-9, you do not mail anywhere. You keep that in the file, again, under lock and key. You would retain for at least 4 years after the last return was filed. Everybody's different. They say some people keep it 7 years, some people keep it 3. But based on what I found, and this was from the IRS website, was 4 years.
Okay, another question. Since the people who help me, they don't go by the hours, they go by the job that they do. Like I said, just clean the party room and I pay her $25. She might not take 3 hours. Do I still have to do that?
We're going to talk about your stuff at the end.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of things that go into this. It's more than that. So we'll just keep all your questions, but I will talk to you at the end.
Okay.
So this is what the W-4 looks like. Again, you don't complete any part of the W-4. This is by them, and you keep it in the files. Again, you don't tell them anything about how many exemptions or dependents or anything like that. That's just a sample. Okay. People ask me all the time, what is considered a wage? Every single penny that you pay your employees because of the work they performed is considered a wage as far as the state and federal government. So any bonuses, anything you pay them by the hour, anything you pay them by salary. You can pay them by piecework as well, which is maybe like farm labor. They get paid by the bag of potato. Or this used to be the Hager the Hager facility, so they probably got paid by the number of pants they produced. So you can be paying by piecework, but the form of payment isn't what matters. It's that you're paying the minimum wage. It's that you're paying everything for all the hours they work, things of that nature. So yesterday I had somebody say, but I'm paying them by commission. That's just a form of payment. They're still your employees. You're still required to report everything, and you're still required to take out taxes. There's other issues related to overtime and minimum wage that come into play, but it doesn't matter how you pay them. I've even dealt with farmers that have a ranch hand living at their farm, that's there 24/7. How do they pay them? They compensate them with somewhere to live. They compensate them with food, and they pay them. So there's different ways to pay employees. That doesn't matter. Everything that you pay them has to be quantified and reported. Okay? So we talked about the W-4 form being used to determine how many dependents and things of that nature. Well, if you go to the IRS website and look up Publication 15 Circular E, that is the publication that has all the tables that'll tell you if they make $400 in a 2-week period, this is how much you take out depending on the number of dependents. So I highly recommend, because I'm old school, I like the booklets. I don't like to look online. You can even go to the IRS office in Harlingen and get that little booklet. Sometimes the library in McAllen has that. But that book will have everything related to what we're talking about here regarding this Social Security, Medicare, and income tax withholding, as well as the 940, which we're going to talk about. But that is how you determine how much you take out from their check. People ask me all the time, well, do I take out $200? No, you don't determine it. It's on that table, and it's based off of their W-4. You don't figure that out. Social Security and Medicare as well. You don't determine it. It's already been established. So that's something that changed this year. As of 2013, employee rate went up to 6.2. It's always been 6.2, but that changed when Obama came on. It went down to 4.2, I believe. But this year it went back up. That's always been the rate. Also, the wage base is $113,700. That changed this year. I can't remember what it was last year. But these are things I'm having to keep up with because they're changing based on legislature and things of that nature. You do not determine. This is already determined by law. So you can't say, I'm only going to take out 4% or 3%. No, it's already been determined by law. That's for Social Security. The other thing is that you take out part from their paycheck and you match part of it. So there's two numbers. It's what you're putting in and what you're taking out from their paycheck. So really what they're putting in and what you're putting in. So right now it's 6.2 for the both of you. 6.2 from them and then 6.2 on your part. Now regarding Medicare, it's 1.45 from their part and 1.45 from your part, and there's no wage base. What this wage base means is that in this case, if they make over $113,000, which is possible because there's doctors and very highly professional technical people, scientific and things of that nature, then you still report what you paid them, but you only pay taxes up to $113,700. And if you notice with Medicare, there's no wage base limit. Any questions regarding this? This is pretty straightforward because we can't deviate from it. The only thing that's going to change is the deductions for the dependents and the income tax withholding based on what they put on their W-4. Okay? And this is what the 941 looks like. This is what you use to report Social Security, Medicare, and income tax withholding. This is done every 3 months, and they will mail it to you assuming that the IRS knows that you have employees. This is what I'm talking about when I say if you don't have employees and you have a federal identification number, once you hire employees, you're going to have to download this form or request it from the IRS so they can start sending it to you because you have to file it within that time frame because you get penalized if you don't. So make sure you're aware of this. Any questions regarding the 941? There's really nothing you can deviate from. Just know that that's a responsibility you're going to have, and part of it is going to come from your pocket or the business pocket. Questions?
What if you had employees and then you stopped having employees? Do they stop sending that to you, or do you have to let them know?
You should let them know because you can file 0 reports. Let's say you go through a period where you're not going to have employees, like 1 quarter, you can file a 0 report. Make sure that 0 report is on time because they don't know if you have employees or not, and they still penalize you even if it's 0.
It took me 3 years. I closed one of my businesses. It took me 3 years to get them to stop sending.
Yeah, or contact them and let them know, or send a letter or an email or something to let them know that you're no longer going to have employees. I think the form, or I don't know if it's this one or the 940, that there's a box that you could check off that it's you're no longer going to have employees. So absolutely, though, because they're going to continue sending them to you because they don't know, and it's computerized. So make sure that if you're not going to have employees, but if you think you're going to hire again after a month or two, then just file 0 reports for that quarter or whatever. Did you have a question? The other federal form that is required is the 940. This is to report federal unemployment. We're going to talk about employment for the state and then the federal. The federal unemployment is referred to as FUTA, or FUI in QuickBooks. I think it's Federal Unemployment Insurance, but for most purposes, it's FUTA. The annual, it's only filed once a year, and they will send it to you at the end of the year. The rate is 6% of the first 7,000 of the employee's wages. Now, what that means is that you will still file all of the information for everything that you paid. Let's say this employee, you have one employee and he made $10,000. So you're still going to file that information, but you're only going to pay taxes on the 7,000, which means you're not going to pay taxes on the difference, which is 3,000. I know it's confusing.
7,000, that's it.
For every single employee. Okay, so you could have 5 employees making 8,000, so you're going to report 40,000, but you're only going to pay taxes on
24. I mean,
35. 35.
4 people, 7,000?
5.
Okay.
With the federal government, if you pay state unemployment, you get a reduced rate, and we're going to talk about that when we go over the state unemployment. But understand that this is only once a year, and it's based on the first 7,000 for each employee. What I mean by that is that everybody is separate. So every 7,000 for every employee. Okay? So they could make a lot more, but you're only paying taxes on those 7,000. And this is what it looks like. Again, this is only done once a year, so make sure, for example, this was something I printed out, I believe, back in January, but it says 2012 because we're filing the report for last year and it's due in January of this year. So they give you the whole month to file that report. So this year, January 2014, it's going to say 9/44/2013. Okay? So that's important as well because you don't want to submit a form that's from the previous year or the wrong year. And it happens because we make copies to keep in our files, but then they expire or they change. So just make sure that it's the most recent one. Step number 5 is to register with the new hire program. Federal and state law requires employers to provide within 20 days of effective hire date information about all new hires, or rehired workers to the employer new hire reporting operations center. So what this is used for essentially is for people that are committing fraud, people that owe child support, that's what they're looking for. That's why you're having to report who you've hired. So all you have to do is report, I've hired these people. It's going to ask you for basic information, names, social security numbers, things of that nature. You are not responsible for anything unless they send you a letter saying you're responsible to take out because they owe us child support. They're not going to give you details. They're just going to tell you amounts. Take out $200, take out $100 per check. So you're not responsible for anything except reporting that you hired somebody, okay? A lot of people don't do this step. They really haven't enforced it, but if somebody does an audit, it's something they will ask you. So let's say the Department of Labor comes in and then they say, have you been reporting through the new hire? That may be where you get caught, but nobody's enforcing it as of right now or that I'm aware of. But make sure it's done anyway because that's your responsibility as an employer to file this report. So you can either call or go online and file this information. Yes, ma'am.
What if you had the employee for only a year and now they're gone and they never did that?
I get asked that question a lot, and I'm going to have to call at some point and find out because a lot of people, they've been in business, they've had employees for years, and they've never done it. I don't know that you're not going to get in trouble, but it's important that they know because this is one way to track who's working and who's not working. So we can certainly investigate and find out, but I don't know what the case. I mean, they're no longer working for you, but did you report them on your Texas Workforce Commission report? Okay, so that's another way. See, so they found out either way, and that's what I mean when I say it's not that they're not enforcing the law, it's that there's other ways for them to figure it out or to find out. Okay, anything else? Okay. So all I want to say here is understand that when you become responsible is when they send you letters, and it'll come from the Attorney Generals or the state of Texas, and they'll tell you what you're responsible to do.
Is there a form for that?
No, this is only if they tell you, like that there is somebody that owes money to the state or the federal government, then they'll tell you, they'll send you a form or a letter telling you what you're responsible for.
It says within 20 days.
Yeah, you call or you go online.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
so as of today, I guess,
Uh-huh.
I'm getting 2 employees.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about it. Okay. So remember I mentioned that you have state unemployment and federal unemployment. This is where we talk about state unemployment, which is administered by the Texas Workforce Commission Tax Department. So if you go to the Workforce Solutions offices, they're not going to know. I'm sorry, my ear's ringing. They're not going to know about unemployment taxes because there's a specific department under the Texas Workforce Commission that handles this. They only deal with business owners, and it's all related to unemployment taxes with you. So remember I mentioned that for the federal unemployment taxes, it's $7,000. That's the limit. So with the state unemployment taxes, it's $9,000, and that's right here. Normally, with brand new businesses, the rate is 2.7. Remember I mentioned it's either 0.8 or 8%. So this is kind of in the middle, and that's the starting rate for any new business, assuming that you didn't acquire the business or have common ownership in another business or something like that. So generally, if you're a brand new employer, it's going to be 2.7. That rate is used for a year and a half or 6 quarters. Then at that point, they'll kind of look at your history. If you've had claims against you, and remember, they only qualify if they were laid off through no fault of their own, your rate is either going to go up or down. So you're going to see a difference. You're either going to pay a lot less or a lot more. Okay? So keep in mind that if you pay the state unemployment taxes, you will get a reduced rate for federal unemployment taxes. How do they find out? They do, because I had audits that were related to the 940s. So on the 940 form, because you're only filing that once a year, it's going to ask you what your state unemployment tax number is, and you put that on the actual form, and they compare numbers. So if there's something off, if the totals don't match, somebody's going to contact you, either the IRS or the Texas Workforce, because they have to match. But what they're looking at is that you paid all of your taxes and that you filed all of your reports on time. That's what they're looking at, and then they'll give you the reduced rate for the federal unemployment. Any questions regarding that? Okay. It's a lot. So for new business owners, I understand why it's overwhelming, and I tell people either hire somebody that knows how to do this or outsource it. Get an accountant or CPA that can handle all of this. There's payroll services. There's payroll services online. They can do all of this for you. QuickBooks has a service. It's an extra fee, payroll service, but they have all of this information. But it is overwhelming for somebody that's just starting out because this is a lot to keep up with. Okay, so one of the final steps is by law, you're required to have specific posters posted at your workplace. Now, people ask me all the time, what about if I don't have a workspace? Like truckers, for example, well, they have binders where they have timesheets and things of that nature, or you put together a file that they saw it and they can initial it. So that's no excuse. Even if you don't have an office or a workplace, there's still ways that you can demonstrate that they saw the actual poster. So these posters are like what the minimum wage is, overtime, things of that nature. This is a list of the posters, but this link will take you to them. Payday law poster, that's required by the Texas Workforce. The FLSA, which is minimum wage and overtime and things of that nature, but depending on the type of business that you're in. So construction may have more requirements because of OSHA than a general business would have, like an accounting office. So depending on the type of business you're in. Now, if you're doing government contracting, they'll require different posters, and depending on safety issues, you might have different posters. Just know that you have to have them made available. The thing I want to mention about this is that these links will take you to those posters. It's just a page like this, right? You can print them out in color, you can print them out in black and white, however you want. They're absolutely free, right? But there's companies that will send you a letter and say you could be in violation if you don't have these posters up, and they charge you $125. It's a really pretty red, white, and blue laminated poster that has all of them. You can pay $125, but you don't have to because they're absolutely free. Okay, so just be aware, and they scare you with those letters by saying you could be in violation. So I don't want you to get scared because you can print them out yourselves in black and white. Okay, so this is a summary of what your responsibilities are going to be. If nothing more, this is what you should remember. So the 941 is where you report your Medicare, right? The part that you're taking out for yourself and the part you're taking out for them. The 941 is also used for the Social Security. The reason I have this way is because this is what's coming out of your pocket as a business owner. So you're taking out your part of the Social Security, the Medicare. You're also paying the state unemployment. These top three are every quarter, every 3 months. The bottom one is the only one that's annually. Now, well, I kind of have to say that if you're a domestic employer, which means a household employer, you could have other requirements annually, but most of you, I don't think any of you are. So just keep in mind, these are the things coming out of your pocket. Social Security, Medicare, state unemployment, and federal unemployment. Those are the requirements for most businesses. You could have workers' compensation, you could have other types of insurance, depending on your business and depending on your industry. But these are generally what you will see as a business owner once you have employees. Any questions regarding your responsibilities? So now we're going to go into some of the other laws. We mentioned some of them. This is a little bit more in depth with, what minimum wage is, what overtime is. We have about 20 minutes. So the very first agency I want to discuss is the U.S. Department of Labor. Now, they administer and enforce over 180 federal laws. We're not going to talk about 180 laws here. We're going to talk about 2 that could possibly fall under something that you would have to comply with. The first one is OSHA, which depending on your business again. But I do recommend that you as a business owner contact OSHA and see if they could come and do like an audit. They don't fine you or penalize you when you invite them to come to your business. It's when there's a violation that you get in trouble or if there's an issue. So if you can call them and they can come and do an audit and tell you, an example would be in a daycare, fax toner is considered toxic or could be considered poisonous for children. So they recommend that they keep those under lock and key in a cabinet. So those are the types of things you might want to know depending on the type of business that you have. So if you're a daycare, aside from the safety of the children, there could be other things in your place of business that could be maybe locked away in a cabinet or put away somewhere else or kept outside, things of that nature. So you can invite them. There's a part of the OSHA agency that will allow you to, they'll come out to you. They welcome that. They really want you to do that. They have webinars all the time. They have seminars all the time where you can talk to them. They talk about a lot of different stuff. It always astonishes me, like they talk about safety, including in your employee handbook for women not to wear heels over 4 inches because then they trip and they break their ankles and it happened at the workplace, then it becomes an issue. Or open toes around construction. Well, that's a lot of liability. So they talk to you about things like that. They will see the location, if there's any electrical stuff that you need to address, plumbing, anything like that. So we think about it with regard to construction or some of those higher risk industries, but it could potentially affect your small business as well. If you don't know that you're allergic to, a specific type of ink or something. So keep that in mind. And then the wage and hour division, which we're going to go into, they enforce, actually, I think I got ahead of myself. Yes, I did. So these are some of the requirements that may apply to most businesses. I talk about hazardous communication standards, about hazardous chemicals. Again, an example would be like toner, cleaning supplies, things like that in the workplace and how to protect yourselves. So that's something you could consider if you're just an office business or a service type business. An emergency action plan, which is something we highly recommend. An example of this would be the people at the island, the businesses at the island. What is your plan? What's going to happen if we have to shut down? What's going to happen to the people that are scheduled to work that day? You know, who's going to call who? Things of that nature. We don't think of it out here in the Edinburgh-McAllen area because we don't have as much risk as the Cameron County area. But what is it, a year ago, 2 years ago, when the hailstorm came about, there was businesses that literally shut down because their computers were down or their electricity was down or literally their roof caved in. So we recommend that you have an emergency plan in place. Actually, we have CDs that can help you put that together, and we have a lot of links that can help you with that. Fire safety is pretty self-explanatory. We want to make sure that you understand what the requirements are and then how you protect yourself, as well as exit routes, walking and working services, and then always having a medical or first aid kit. And it's, you know, Band-Aids, some sort of antibiotic or, antiseptic balm or whatever you want to call it, but having something in place. So even here, we're looking for Band-Aids sometimes because we get paper cuts. You don't think about it, but it's feasible. Okay, so the Wage and Hour Division is Fair Labor Standards Act is administered by the Wage and Hour Division. This act establishes standards for the following: minimum wage, overtime, record keeping, and child labor laws. So minimum wage, the Fair Labor Standards Act requires employers of covered employees who are not otherwise exempt to pay these employees a minimum wage of not less than $7.25 per hour effective as of July 24th, 2009. Now, notice it says if otherwise exempt. So everybody's included in the law unless there's a specific exemption for that specific position. How do you determine if that position is exempt or not? If you don't have a job description. You can't defend yourself. This happens a lot down here in the valley. The managers are exempt. We don't pay them overtime. Why? This manager is just called a manager, but they have no authority. You know, sometimes we say she's a manager, so we don't have to pay them overtime, but they can't fire, they can't hire, they can't create policy, they can't change policy, they have no authority. They're just a salesperson that maybe is a lead worker, but it doesn't mean that they're exempt or that makes them exempt just because you call them a manager. The Department of Labor, the first thing they're going to ask you for is a job description because they want to know. Then they're going to interview the employee and say, do you do these things? Do you have authority to hire and fire? Do you have authority to change policy or create policy? So again, this all goes back, right? So this is another way that you protect yourself with that job description, because now you can protect yourself if you can say they're exempt because they fall under this category. It's very detailed. The Department of Labor comes and does an entire 2-hour seminar specifically about that. So I'm not going to go into that, but just know that unless there's an exemption in their policies, everybody else is included. Now, there is something called sub-minimum wage. There's exemptions, so we know like waiters and waitresses, that would be considered sub-minimum wage. But there's very specific laws about that. You may not be paying a minimum wage because they're getting tips, but they still have to earn the equivalent of what they would be making with minimum wage. So I don't want to go into that either because they have another class with that, but it's very detailed and intricate about how you figure it out. So keep that in mind, that there's ways around it, but you have to fall within certain categories or exemptions. And there's, like this fact sheet will tell you what that includes and the criteria that you have to follow. Any questions regarding that? Okay. So if anybody asks, as of right now, the minimum wage is $7.25. That has not changed. It would make national news if it did, because this is a federal law. Overtime pay. The federal overtime provisions are contained under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Employees covered by FLSA must receive overtime pay for hours worked over 40 in a work week at a rate not less than time and 1/2 their regular rate of pay. So that means if they work 40 hours and 15 minutes, those 15 minutes would be paid on an overtime basis. You have to know that. Now, a question that I get asked here a lot is, what is full-time, part-time, all of that? Doesn't matter what you say it is, as long as you don't go over the 40 hours, or if you do, that you pay them the minimum wage. There's no law as of right now, because this could change when this healthcare stuff comes about. As of right now, there's no law that says 40 is full-time, some people have 38 as full-time, some people have 20 as part-time, some people have 25 as part-time. So there's no law that identifies what's full-time and part-time. Now, with healthcare reform, that could possibly come about, and they could say for those purposes of that healthcare reform or the Affordable Care Act, they could possibly say 25 is part-time and 35 is full-time or whatever. But as of right now, there's nothing that says that. But I keep saying that because remember, this is going to make national news and you will be able to see this somewhere in writing. But right now we don't. And again, people that are exempt from this, you have to make sure that you fall under one of the categories. And how do you determine that? Well, you'd have to go to their website, print out these fact sheets that tell you what the exemption is. Okay, record keeping. Again, there's no law that says you have to keep these records computerized or you have to keep these records this way or that way. I used to do audits and I would get boxes of receipts. I would get notebooks where people would write information, or the old, accounting bookkeeping logs, the big green ones, I would get that as well. So there's no law that says you have to keep them a certain way. Just however you keep them organized, and don't make it more difficult for the auditors, your accountant, for you. So just keep them organized and make sure that it includes the information we're going to talk about next. So they want to know this information. So however you maintain your records, whether it's in a general ledger, in a notebook, or computerized, make sure that it has this information that they're looking for. And this is pretty much going to be what the Texas workforce, the IRS, what they're going to look at as well. So they cover a lot, but this is what we want you to have as far as your payroll information. Child labor. So anybody hiring anybody under the age of 16? Any 14, 15, 16 years old? I mean, if it's...
They're all illiterate.
But I would like to know
I'm
because,
terrible.
because
If they're related to you, it's very different, and if you're a sole proprietorship, it's very different. So this is regarding, like, if you're hiring kids 14, 15, 16, there's laws about how many hours they can work, and there's laws about the days they can work. So within which is the work week, but is also the school week, they have laws regarding that. But if they're your children, that's a little bit different. Yeah. Well, see, that's different. So we'll talk about that separate. She has a lot going on.
There's another job for you.
Oh, yeah. So just keep in mind that if you are hiring 14, 15, 16-year-olds, there's laws, and we'll go into that a little bit
Is
if you
14
want.
the cutoff?
No, but they're the protected groups right now. So
Can you hire a 13-year-old?
if they're your own children and it's your company, probably, yeah. I mean, I've seen 10, 9-year-olds in grocery stores, things like that, convenience stores, so yeah. My cousin had a convenience store. She has her 5-year-old working, so. But
Kids going places.
yeah. So we talked about this earlier. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission enforces federal laws prohibiting employment discrimination, protects employees and job applicants. So remember, it's not just once you hire them, it's also when you're announcing or recruiting them. So keep that in mind. And we talked about the protections. It's race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, national origin, age, which we already know is 40 or older, disability or genetic information. Okay? And then harassment is also under the EEOC, harassment by other employees, harassment by managers and supervisors as well. Denial of reasonable workplace accommodation. Remember I talked about they can ask you for reasonable accommodations. You know, it's difficult to measure, but if you cannot afford a $3,000 computer for a disabled person, then that's not within reason. And it's going to be based on what your company can afford or what you can, what's practical for your business. The other one is retaliation because the employee complained about job discrimination or assisted with job discrimination investigation and or lawsuits. So you cannot discriminate because somebody went and reported you to the Department of Labor. You can't discriminate or hold it against them if they do that. So keep that in mind. Any questions regarding this? We can talk one-on-one if you have specific questions, or I can refer you to somebody depending on what kind of discrimination you want to discuss. Okay. So we're lucky that in Texas, we pretty much follow or parallel the federal laws. So the minimum wage is the same, the laws about children are the same, and then payday law, which requires employees to be paid, are pretty much the same. The only thing I want to mention here is that we don't see it very often, but I happen to personally know the child labor law investigator. So remember that not only is it about how many hours they can work and what days they work, but also what machinery they can operate if they're 14, 15, 16. So like trash compactors and specific types of knife, or like if cutters, like a deli cutter, things like that, there's laws against them doing that type of work. So for example, one case I've seen a lot of is like these little kids that are selling the newspaper. I mean, there was a really big case about that, I don't know, but 10 years ago, because somebody got injured. You know, these little kids, some of them are 9, 10 years old, and they're selling the newspaper on Sundays. But that's against the law because they're working, first of all, and then they're in danger. So they shouldn't be in danger. So the child labor investigators not only looking at the hours and all of that, they're looking at what equipment they're using and what type of work they're doing. Minimum wage hasn't changed in Texas, and it's the same as the federal. Texas payday law. So every time I bring this up, I forget the exact wording. But by law, you have to pay your employees. So what I get asked a lot is, what if they're stealing from you? By law, you have to pay them. And you have to pay them depending on if they're fired or if they quit on their own. There's a certain time frame. So one of them is 6 days and the other one is the next pay period. But you still have to pay them. So you can't say they're stealing from me, so I'm not going to pay them, I'm going to keep their check. You cannot do that. They can file a wage claim against you, and that'll prompt an investigation. And let me tell you that I know that the payday law department actually freezes your bank accounts when they find out this kind of stuff. So make sure that you pay them. If you want to know the specific wording on the law, I can email that to you. I always forget it. I can't keep it in my head. But just know that you have to pay them. You can't hold their check or withhold their check just because they owe you money or they're stealing from you or because they owe you a uniform or anything like that. You have to be responsible for your end of the law, even though they probably stole from you. And what we say about that is if they stole from you or you suspect, then press charges. Don't just say it and hold their check. You know, press charges, follow through, do things of that nature. And again, this is even asked when it's regarding unemployment claims. They're going to ask you, did you press charges? And if you say, well, no, you know, I didn't do that. Well, then how do you prove that they stole from you or didn't? So that's a whole other can of worms. But just keep in mind that you have to pay them by law.
What if they pay you and take a deduction?
What do you mean?
Deduct whatever they think they're...
Well, by law, you cannot deduct anything from their check except what's federally mandated. So Social Security, Medicare, right? Anything else, and we didn't talk about this because it's another hot button issue, anything else you're going to deduct, you have to get written permission from them. So I don't recommend you deducting uniforms or equipment, or sometimes business owners will do loan advances. You have to get their written permission to take it out of their check. And that, you know, that kind of opens you up to other liabilities. So I don't recommend that, but just know that by law, you can only deduct Social Security, Medicare, and anything an agency or federal government tells you, and anything else you would need to get written permission. Okay, workers' compensation. Finally, we got there. So in Texas, private employers, and I'm reading from right here, can choose whether or not to carry workers' compensation insurance coverage, okay? But you are required to let the agency know that you do not have workers' compensation, and then of course you're required to notify if something happens. So that just opens you to a whole lot of liability. You can have the state workers' compensation, or you can have a private insurance that could be used as workers' compensation. But if you don't have any protection in terms of workers' compensation or insurance, that opens you up to a lot of liability. Because if something happens, the difference between the private and the workers' compensation that the state mandated is that with the state mandated program, there's a limit to the liability. So if they sue you, you're basically going to cover medical bills and things of that nature. But with private insurance, they could sue you for millions of dollars and there's no limit. But keep in mind that if anything happens, even if you don't have workers' compensation, if somebody gets hurt or, God forbid, dies at your workplace, you have to notify them, and that's going to prompt an investigation. Okay? Okay, I think we're getting there. So we haven't talked about this, but I like to mention it as far as putting together files for your employees. Remember, everything is going to be kept under lock and key. And this should only be made available to whoever's handling the payroll or you or the accounting person, not to all of the employees because they happen to have a key to your office, things of that nature. And if you have an office that everybody can access, then put it in a locked cabinet or take them home or something like that. But this is just an example of how you could set up an employee file. So the application, the resume, the allowance certificate, which is the W-4, any kind of acknowledgement, anything else that you could put. What I want to emphasize here is that any medical information, because now it's not even about employment records, it's about medical records. Any medical information should be completely separate and definitely under lock and key, because the Health and Human Services has what's called HIPAA rules or guidelines, and you cannot disclose any medical information. And that causes you a lot of liability issues. Information gathered during an interview process should be kept in a separate file. Your own notes, you should probably keep in a separate file, because employees can access their files if they ask you or if you say it's okay. So you don't want to be first of all, you don't want to be writing anything you shouldn't be writing on your notes when you're interviewing, but keep anything like that separate. And then the I-9 forms, the reason we recommend that they're kept in a separate file or binder or whatever is because when the Immigration and Customs and Immigration Services comes in, they have a right to look at the I-9s. When I was an auditor, I would go in and they would give me all the payroll records with medical information, with vacation information. I didn't need to know all of that. All I needed to know was payroll information and their paychecks. So the authority they have is over the I-9 files. So you want to keep them all together, probably separate in a file, so that if they come in and say, show me all your I-9s, that's what you're going to bring out. Okay? And then finally, remember I mentioned that there's assistance available to you, so I want to make sure that you know these websites and phone numbers because it is very helpful. A lot of the information that I get and then my counterparts that do HR get is from these agencies. So the Texas Workforce Commission has a commissioner representing employers. So you can call them and ask them questions. They'll guide you in the right direction, or they'll refer you to a specific website or something. They're attorneys. This is what they do, so they know what they're talking about. So you can get free assistance from them. The Internal Revenue Service, like I mentioned to you, with regard to that, is the Publication 15, which is going to talk to you about 940s, 941s, and everything related to your employee requirements. And then the Department of Labor as well, that's their website. The federal websites that I use to put together this presentation are all here. Are they going to get a copy of this presentation? Okay. So you're going to get a copy of this presentation, and you'll have all of these links. And then these are the state websites that I use to put this together. What the most important part, and this again is something that I want you, once you get the presentation, is separate, keep it somewhere, is the local contact information. So the Department of Labor is located in McAllen on Hackberry. They have customer service representatives that you can go ask questions to. So definitely take advantage. So what are we going to ask the individual at the Department of Labor? If we have any questions, what would we be asking the Department of Labor? This is a test, and this time I have candy.
Wait, just in hours.
I'm sorry? What are we asking?
We have to pay over time and a half after 40 hours.
Exactly. We're asking about minimum wage and overtime and maybe child labor laws, but definitely minimum wage and overtime. So when you start trying to figure out, should this person be on salary or hourly, and should I be paying overtime, these are the people you're going to ask. And I get these questions all the time, but he gets minimum wage and then commission, and how many hours does he work? 60? Well, is he salary? Like, we get so many questions that they're the experts, and it's better if you hear it from them because they're the authority on this.
Yeah, thank you.
The Texas Workforce Commission Tax Department, you're going to be talking to them about state unemployment taxes, so which is SUTA, right? SUTA or SUI. That's what a lot of different software uses. But they have an office where you can go and talk to a representative about your specific situation. So you can talk to them about, should I be reporting this person on my employer's quarterly report, and how much taxes do I have to pay, what's my tax rate, things of that nature. So absolutely, there's a person there you could talk to or call them. The good thing about the Texas Workforce Commission is that a lot of the stuff that you do, I don't know if this microphone hurting my ear. A lot of the stuff that you do is you can do online. You can file the reports, pay the reports, adjust the reports, amend the reports. You can close your account. You can do all this stuff online. Not just because I work there do I love that, but I know the IRS doesn't allow for that, but it would be a good thing. The Texas Department of Insurance Division of Workers' Compensation there's an office in Weslaco that you can go ask questions to. So if you have workman's comp or you want to find out more about workman's comp, that's where you would go. And then finally, the IRS office in Harlingen. Now, that's the only office here in Harlingen, but that's all they do there. It's customer service. They answer questions. They also have a lot of the booklets. They have them out in the front, a lot of the forms that you can go get. I know that I work in Harlingen sometimes. My mom works for a CPA, and she's always asking me, pick up forms, because that's the only place they have them. And you don't want to be printing a lot of it. You want the official form. And also to confirm that you have the official documents. So in conclusion, again, you're responsible, even if you have employees designated. So sometimes I would hear when I worked for the Texas Workforce, well, my secretary does that report. Well, but you're still responsible. I'm not calling looking for your secretary. I'm calling looking for you, because you have to report it. You have to pay for it. So you're responsible even if you designate somebody. So again, keep that in mind. The other thing I want to mention about that is that a lot of times they would say, well, my secretary opens the mail. We're not coming after the secretary. We're coming after you. You're going to be responsible. Your name is on that door as the owner or whatever, corporate officer or whatever. So make sure that you know what's going on. You may not be doing the reports on a regular basis, but be aware of what's going on. Also be aware that they're paying the taxes, whoever you designate, because I did see a lot of cases where they assumed things were being paid and we never got a check, which means something was going on. Somebody was taking the money or something. So make sure you're aware. Never assume that an employee is making all your payments. And then also remember to respond to everything. So again, if you have somebody designated to look at all of this information and file all the reports, but you get an unemployment claim letter, make sure they tell you, because who's going to be responsible? And remember, you're paying at a higher rate for 3 years if you don't catch that, if you don't respond to that. And you not responding gives them the assumption that there's no question to, what do you call it? You're not disputing the situation, so make sure you're aware of that. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much.
How about me?
Good job.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Any questions regarding anything we went over? I know it's a lot, and I know it's overwhelming.
So we're going to discuss the legal issues. And well, we're going to talk about our contracts, commercial leases, insurance, protecting information, zoning, and advertising. What are the laws that kind of concern those? First, we're going to talk about contracts. As a small business owner, you're going to see, and you're going to actually get into a lot of contracts with a lot of different people. And basically what a contract is an agreement between two people or more, and it exchanges things of value. So say you get in contract with a supplier, your thing of value is that you're giving up cash and he's giving you inventory. So that's a simple contract. A contract can be both written and oral. And a big difference there is that if you contract to do something and you can do it within a year, it can be oral. If you contract to do something and it's going to take longer than a year to complete, then it has to be in writing. Okay? Just remember that a contract can be oral. It can be between two people. Now, if you do get a contract from somebody, there's many different things that constitute a contract, but most of the time it's an offer and the other person has to accept it. Now, if somebody offers you something that creates a contract, and you counter offer the contract, that contract is null and void. Your counter offer to the contract has created a whole new contract. So you can't counter a contract. A lot of people, they do that. They're like, well, let's like I'll use a real estate contract. Like I'll pay $100,000, or I'm offering to sell you my house for $100,000. Now you counter that and you say, well, I'm only willing to pay you $90,000. Well, the first contract is no good anymore because you counter offered the contract. So now you have a contract for $90,000. So I don't have to accept it. So, and that makes up a contract. Other parts that makes a contract null and void kind of thing is fraud. If I'm willing to make a contract with you, say I'm willing to sell you my house for $100,000, but it's not really my house, that makes a contract pretty much void. If I misrepresent something, if I sell you a warehouse and I say, no, we have city plumbing, but there's no city plumbing, there's a big old reservoir in the back, that I misrepresented to you that there was city plumbing. That could nullify a contract. And another thing is you cannot make a contract with somebody for something illegal. So if I tell you that I'm going to sell you illegal drugs and you say, I will buy your illegal drugs for, say, $10,000, that contract is null and void because you cannot make a contract for something, an illegal act. Same thing like, if I tell you that I will give you $10,000 if you rob this place. Well, robbing it is an illegal act, so there cannot be a contract. Things to include in a contract are the name and addresses of both parties, the date the contract is signed, background of the agreement, what constitutes the agreement, what each party is promising to do, when the work is to be delivered. Like I said, it can be oral or written, either way. Basically, the price, what's the value of the product. And by price, it doesn't have to be an equal price. I may contract to sell you an expensive painting for $1,000, but that painting might be worth $10,000. It doesn't have to be equal value. It's a legal contract if I'm willing to give you something of value that I own for something of value that you own. So, but it could be a benefit like that. It does not have to be equal one-on-one. Basically, in a contract, you're going to say when the payment is due, and usually a contract, what you want to put in there is what damages are. Are there going to be any damages for not being able to perform it correctly? Right here, a contract is in writing. Only the terms that are in the contract are enforceable. When it goes to court, the court usually is going to look at what's in writing. They're not going to listen to oral arguments because then it becomes more of a he said, she said, or he said kind of thing. They're going to see what's in writing. These are some rules for signing a contract. Basically, these are never sign a contract if you do not understand all the terms of the contract. Never sign a contract if you're not in full agreement with all the terms of the contract. Never sign a contract that does not contain all the terms of the agreement. Like I said, you can't sign a contract and say, well, then at the end of you're going to build me a lake or a little waterway. That's not in writing. It's not enforceable. Never sign a contract without reading it first. Make sure you read it and you know everything that's in that contract. If you don't know something, find out before you sign the contract. Because once your name is on that contract, it's going to be real hard for you to change something. Just to give you an example, like let's say that I contracted with you $10,000 to paint a room. And I say, well, I'm paying you $10,000 to paint a room in 6 months. And then you come back to me and you said, well, I misestimated it's going to cost me $15,000 to paint the room in 6 months. That $5,000 extra is not enforceable because it's not in the written contract.
That happened to me.
See,
The person changed the floor,
mm-hmm.
and he said it's like $4,000. And then he put people to work and all that, and then he's like, oh, I miscalculated. Can you give me another $500 so I can cover it? I'm like, I don't think so. This is what we agreed on.
Mm-hmm.
You were a mistake.
Yep, exactly.
But he wanted to get money.
Right. There's no, because the contract has to be an agreement where both of you give value for something. And you've already agreed to give him value to paint the room at $10,000. You did not make a new contract to paint the room for $15,000. So.
Would it be advisable to have witnesses and or notarized?
I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer, so usually a contract between two people, as long as they have their signatures, that's all it takes for a court of law. It doesn't have to be witnessed. Next, we're going to talk about commercial leases. Kind of goes back into asset management, kind of what we talked about earlier. And lots of times, you're going to want to lease a building or equipment other than buy it because it's a lot cheaper and you don't have to carry it on your books. You don't have to do that. So here we're going to say a lease is a contract between a tenant and a renter and the landlord/owner. And here let me define, usually the landlord is considered the lessor and the tenant is considered the lessee. And the lease needs to identify who is the tenant and who is the landlord. Be sure that you have the authority to sign the lease. Basically, if you are in a partnership and you sign the lease, you are personally responsible for anything. You're personally responsible for your signature. So you're going to be personally responsible for making sure that you make the lease payments. And if you don't make the lease payments, then usually the lease has some kind of damages that it requires. So basically, when you elements of a lease is use a prepaid lease. And you can get a lot of leases that are prepaid. You can get the documentation at like your office store, like an Office Depot or an Office Max or something like that. They carry them. Basically, a lease talks about equal treatment for the landlord and the lessee. It should state the starting date of the lease, when you're going to have access to the building, and it should also state a termination date. A lot of leases don't have a termination date. What they do is they switch from like a 1-year lease to a month-to-month type thing. So and it needs to state that in the lease. Another thing that the lease ought to have, be able to negotiate solutions for foreseeable problems. It's not negotiate problems for unforeseen things. I mean, if the building gets destroyed, that pretty much ends the lease. But if the building gets flooded, you need to have that. If the building gets flooded, what's going to happen? Who's going to clean it up? Where are you going to go for, till the cleanup? Things like that. Are you required to make the payment while the cleanup is going on? So things like that they need to be addressed inside the lease. And the lease should clearly identify the premise of the property that you're leasing. Actually, a course I took, this is one of the major parts of any kind of lease, is that it needs to identify what is being leased. If you're leasing a truck, if you're leasing a building, are you leasing an office space, things like that. That is what creates a lease. It needs to be clearly identified. It doesn't matter how much you lease it for. That does not have to be in the lease. But as we stated, it needs to be of equal value. So basically, other elements of the lease is to check for restrictions on the space that you're leasing. Are there any restrictions? Is there things that you can't do? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the zoning part. Negotiate terms of improvement up to the building. You know, who's required to do the repair? Are you going to put a sign on the building? Things like that. Like here we talk about typical tenant expenses. Our utilities, telephone, internet, insurance, taxes, maintenance, and garbage. Next we'll talk about typical landlord expenses. Our utilities, insurance, taxes, maintenance, the air conditioning system, common areas, elevators. Now you'll see some similarities between expenses for the tenant and for the landlord. Make sure you agree upon these terms. A lot of them are who's going to pay the real estate taxes? Who's going to pay the utilities for the building? Is it a building where basically the landlord is going to pay for the utilities and then charge you every month for it? Or are you required to have a meter that is just you? Make sure the stuff is specified in the lease agreement. Maintenance. Are you renting an office space? Are you just in charge of making sure the outside gets mowed? Or is the landlord in charge of making sure that the lawn gets mowed and things like that? Disputes. Look at your lease. Basically here, this is real important. Keep an extra copy of your lease somewhere other than your office building. This is if you lease an office space. Keep an extra copy in a safe deposit box or at home or something like that, in case you do get locked out, in case of a natural disaster, in case of a fire. You have a copy of what you're supposed to do. You have a copy of anything that's disputed. Right here, put all complaints in writing. Deliver it to the person individually or by certified mail. I recommend certified mail. Get a signature. A long time ago, I heard something that if you have something documented, a court is more likely to believe you if it's documented than if you say, well, it's like this because I said so. Remember, the reason to have a lease is lockouts can occur. Maybe a water main breaks and destroys a lot of your documentation. So things can happen. Make sure that you have a resolution for things like that. These are some other issues that come into leases. Subordination, attornment, the security deposit. Here, remember, the security deposit is owed back to you 60 days after you terminate the lease. Okay? The security deposit cannot be deducted for normal wear and tear on the building. It can be deducted if you damage something, but not for wear and tear. Not like just coming in and out of the building. Strip center lease issues usually have like a percentage rent clause. It has like a competing business clause. They have a duty to remain open. And usually it has the landlord's right to relocate the tenant. So, insurance. Just cover insurance real quick. It's real important to understand insurance is there to reduce your risk. When you get insurance, it's important to have enough property or liability insurance to cover what you're doing. And here we say, property and liability insurance, it can be and or. Not everybody has to have liability insurance. It's not required, but like I said, it reduces your risk. Buy insurance only if it's reasonably priced. It's kind of like, does it have a cost-benefit ratio? I mean, do you have the money to pay for it? What's it gonna cost you? Compare that to the benefit that you're gonna get from the insurance that you receive if something happens? Right here at the bottom, it states that generally businesses are not required to have insurance, but it depends on your situation. And we'll talk about a few of those situations. On your policy, know what your policy states, know what events are covered and aren't covered. Know how the property is to be calculated if there is a loss. Home-based businesses, know what is covered and what is not covered in your insurance policy, your renter's policy. Maybe you have to have a business policy. And understand what is excluded. What can't you do? So, and one of the things we talked about earlier was I like to use the example of selling beer. Some places can sell beer and some places can't, depending on their insurance policy. So, if you're a tenant, look at the terms of your lease. Does your lease state that you're required to purchase insurance? Many of the licenses or permits that we talked about, like the special licenses and the special permits that you have to get, some of them require that you carry a certain type of insurance. So be aware of what you need. We just talked about workers' compensation insurance and unemployment insurance. A lot of government contracts require that you have an insurance policy. A lot of times when you get a loan from a bank, the bank requires that part of the loan agreement is that you have a life insurance policy that will cover what you borrowed, and with them named as a beneficiary. Okay, next we're going to talk about protecting confidential information. And I like to go back to what Christina talked about, employees' files. And they have to be under lock and key. And it's good to put things in different things because they're protected by law. And as you can see at the very bottom, not at the bottom of this one, okay, the second to the bottom, employee information about clients. Never give out confidential information. And usually the only way that you can give out information on on an employee is if they provide you with written permission to do so, or if you get subpoenaed by a court. Another thing that you want to protect is covenants not to compete and non-disclosure agreements. So, non-compete promises are usually provided from one. Say when you're buying a business from another business owner and he provides you with a non-compete clause stating that he's not going to compete against your business because usually you want to get this from them when you start your business. They can't be unreasonable. They can't contain too many types of businesses. I mean, if a guy sells like insurance, you can't say, well, you can't sell car insurance, home insurance, business insurance, umbrella policies, life insurance, anything like that. Usually they're real specific, like the pizza place. Well, you can't open another pizza place. It can't be something general like, well, you can't open a restaurant. So, a non-disclosure agreement is basically a contract that an employee is not going to provide, or is not going to use your trade secrets. If breached, you can request a court to stop the employee or the violator from making any further disclosures, and you can sue for damages. So, trademarks. Basically, trademarks are created by product recognition. Here we have an example of the golden arches at McDonald's. I mean, a lot of people know McDonald's as the golden arches. So if you were to infringe upon that, they could sue you. A trademark is a word, name, or symbol that identifies or distinguishes goods. And trademarks don't have to be registered. Trademarks are not like patents. Next, we'll talk about patents a little bit. Trademarks do not have to be registered, but they are generally protected by the law. And trademarks do not have a finite life. They're infinite. As long as you're using the trademark, it's good. So it's not like, well, it's going to expire in 100 years. No, as long as you're using the trademark, it's going to remain good. Next, we're going to talk about patents. What a patent is something given to you by the federal government, and it protects an invention. It's real good to talk to a patent attorney. We talked a little bit about patents. I would say the average patent nowadays costs $15,000 to get a patent on an invention.
Talk to a lawyer.
Talk to a lawyer. I really recommend talking to a lawyer, because with patents, you have to get very detailed about how you do stuff, how it's made, processes, things like that. Another thing about patents is keep your ideas secret. And because there is, as far as I know, there's two ways to get a patent. And they're switching to where it's the first person to file a patent. It used to be the first person to invent something and describe how you have it invented. And as long as you have documentation, you can fight it in a court. Nowadays, they're switching more to the first person to get to the patent office. So, and like I said, don't take my word for it. Talk to a patent lawyer. They can probably tell you a little bit more about that. Zoning, home-based business. We'll get into a little bit about that. A lot of people, they start their business at home. Make sure that you're in a area that is zoned for businesses. Lots of times, a city or a county will zone a part of a neighborhood just for residential or just for business. Make sure that if you have a home-based business, you can do both if you get too big. Because your neighbors don't want people pulling up into your parking lot, at all times of the day going, who's that? So, non-home-based business, make sure you know what you are zoned for. I know some places, and an example I like to use is like a dry cleaning business. Some places are zoned where they can use hazardous chemicals. Other places are zoned that they can't use hazardous chemicals. Dry cleaning uses hazardous chemicals. That's why a lot of your local dry cleaning places, you'll go drop off your dry cleaning. Well, that's all it is drop off and pickup point. They put their stuff in a van and they go to a certain place that is zoned for hazardous chemicals where it can be more controlled. So everybody's seen the little HC sign on roads. Talks about what roads are zoned for hazardous chemicals and what roads cannot be, that aren't zoned for hazardous chemicals. So next, let's talk about advertising a little bit. This is actually regulated by the FTC, and advertising must be truthful and non-deceptive. And I'll get more into what's considered non-deceptive. And advertisers must have evidence to back up their claims, and advertising cannot be unfair. So what is deceptive? An ad is deceptive if it contains a statement or omits information that is likely to mislead the consumer under reasonable circumstances, and or it's also material in the consumer's decision to purchase that product. So that's what's deceptive. What's unfair is if an ad is likely to cause substantial injury, and this could be both physical injury, monetary injury to a customer. And basically, being unfair, it's not outweighed by the benefits to the consumer. So ways to protect yourself: it must have a reasonable basis, which means that you must have evidence to support the advertising claim. At a minimum, an advertiser must have the level of evidence that it says it has. So just in summary, use caution and limit your legal risk. Be aware of a contract, know what a contract is, know what should be in a contract. Remember to read everything, understand what's in a contract, because once you sign it, you are responsible for whatever it says. And if you do go to court, usually the court's going to look and say, well, this is what's in writing over what is said. When it comes to insurance, remember insurance is there to reduce your risk. Buy insurance, look at the cost benefit ratio. Is what it's going to cost you, is it going to benefit you in the long run? One of the things, like when we did orientation and we talked about dental insurance, the dental insurance was, I think it was $3,000 a year, but most people, when they go to the dentist, they don't pay more than $1,000 out of pocket, so there's no reason to get the insurance. Now, if the insurance only costs $200 and they pay $1,000 out of pocket, well, then there's a benefit to buying the insurance. So take that into consideration when you're buying insurance. Know what to protect. Know that you need to protect all kinds of legal documents, all kinds of business documents, and seek legal help whenever you have a question. Make sure you ask a lawyer. Like I said before, I think one of the resources that we talked about was LegalZoom.com, and I even think they have a place to, if you need to talk to a lawyer, they can help you. So, and these are some of the resources that we used: Texas Bar Association, LegalZoom, Biz Filings. So, are there any questions?